This is Jocko podcast number 440 with Echo Charles and me, Jocko Wellington. Good evening, Echo.
Good evening.
So on podcast 438, we talked about Robert McNamara's book. It's called In Retrospect. And in it, there's some very important lessons, hard-learned lessons from the Vietnam War. And then in talking to General Sean McFarland on podcast 439, it's clear that we have a tendency to sometimes make the same mistakes. We don't learn. And that's pretty evident when you look at some of the mistakes that we made in Vietnam that we also made in Iraq and Afghanistan. It made me think of a book that I've had for a while that it's going to be very clear. The book is by B.H. Liddell Hart, and the book is very fittingly called Why Don't We Learn from History? So I remembered that book as I was thinking through these lessons that we have not learned, and I opened it up to refresh my memory, and I found that, like much of B.H. Liddell Hart's work, there are some really good lessons in there. Oddly enough, many of them don't have anything to do with or only tangibly relate to us not learning from history. So even though the book is called Why Don't We Learn from History, a lot of the lessons in it are only tangentially related to that, even though it does talk about why we don't learn from history. So there's some amazing lessons in this book about war, about history, about leadership, and about life. And so I wanted to take a look at it. Look, B.H. Liddell Hart, we've covered him before on this podcast, number 285, 286, number 287, all about the strategy of the indirect approach. Covered those with Dave Burke.
Good deal, Dave.
That's the one. And so to refresh your memory, B.H. Liddell Hart, Sir Basil Henry Liddell Hart, to be exact, born Halloween 1895. He was the son of a Methodist minister. He went to Cambridge for college because he's a Brit. World War I, volunteered for the British Army. He was an officer, an infantry officer in the King's own Yorkshire Light Infantry. And he was on the front in the winter of 1915 for World War I. He suffered some concussive injuries from shell blasts. And by the way, that's in a time when we didn't really understand concussions. So I bet you were really messed up. By the time they sent you home from concussive blasts, it's probably because you couldn't walk straight. So he gets sent home from those, recovers, gets sent back to the front just in time for the Battle of the Somme. Nearly his whole battalion was wiped out. This is, the battle where there was 60,000 casualties in one day for the Brits. I'm going to say that again, 60,000 casualties in one day. He was eventually wounded. He was hit 3 times. He was gassed and eventually couldn't fight anymore. And then he returned from the front, went back to England, and he was involved in training recruits, getting them ready to go. He wrote manuals on infantry and drill and training and stuff like that. And then after the war was over, he transferred to the Royal Army Educational Corps and then retired partially from his medical issues, from his wounds. Retired from the Army in 1927. And he wrote a bunch of books. Wrote a bunch of articles. He wrote about the problems with the frontal assault, which is why I talk a lot about B.H. Liddell Hart and the indirect approach. And there's some myths around the German generals reading his books after World War I and kind of taking his ideas and utilizing them, and that's how they come up with Blitzkrieg. How accurate that is there some truth to it? Perhaps. We're not 100% sure how true it is. But World War II comes. There's definitely maneuver warfare happening, which didn't happen in World War I. And he ends up writing after World War II. He sits down. Actually, this is a book we'll probably review at some point. He interviewed a bunch of German generals to see what they were thinking and what the war was like from their perspective. He ends up in 1954. He writes his most popular book, which is called Strategy. He gets knighted in 1966, dies in 1970. And just left behind a legacy, strategy, and tactics that remain applicable to this day. Like I said, we've covered him on the podcast before, and I've brought him up a bunch of other times as well. And we're going to cover this book and learn some of his thoughts and ideas from this book. Again, this book is called Why We Don't Learn from History. and you're going to see that this relates to us as humans, individuals, groups. The fact that we as people and organizations fail to learn and adapt in our life, in our business. So this book he wrote in 1944, and let's get into it. B.H. Liddell Hart, Why Don't We Learn from History? And it kicks off here. History is the best help, being a record of how things usually go wrong. A long historical view not only helps us keep calm in a time of trouble, but reminds us that there is an end to the longest tunnel. Even if we can see no good hope ahead, and historical interest as to what will happen is help in carrying on. For a thinking man, that can be the strongest check on a suicidal feeling. I would add that the only hope for humanity now is that my particular field of study, warfare, will become purely a subject of antiquarian interest, meaning there should be no more war. That's what he hopes for. With the advent of atomic weapons, we have come either to the last page of war, at any rate on the major international scale we have known in the past, or the last page of history. So if we don't learn from these lessons, this will be the last thing we learn, because we're going to kill ourselves with nuclear weapons. There's the intro in here by a guy named Giles Lauren, somebody from Sacramento. A couple notes that I thought were interesting from the introduction. Man seems to come into this world with an inalterable belief that he knows best and that he can make others think as he does by force. We think we know everything, and we think we can beat other people until they agree with us. He fast forward a little bit. Nations delight in having a militaristic leader represent them and thrive on enforcing their will on lesser powers with a righteous view to the glory and plunder that will follow victory. Peoples are never so united as in the early days of war, nor so determined to overcome once they see that a greater effort and more sacrifices will be demanded of them before success is won. All very noble and all fantasy. Has any war in the history of the world followed such a pattern? None on the ship of fools ever asks. We, of course, are not on the ship of fools, and we do ask. We are those who pursue a knowledge of what happened before our time for pleasure and to gain some understanding that may give us a better judgment in the present and help us better order our lives. So we're studying history to make sure we don't make the same mistakes we've done in the past. This is also from the introduction. Liddell Hart wrote this little book about military matters, but its arguments can be extended much more broadly, in fact, to all facets of human life that make use of an accurate knowledge of what went before. Any successful institution, bureaucracy, bank, business, medical, legal, protects itself from change to its own eventual destruction. Where unification has been able to establish a unity of ideas, it has usually ended in uniformity, paralyzing the growth of new ideas. It keeps doing what may or may not have at one time worked until it no longer works. So it's a little warning. If you and I and our team is all thinking the same way, fired up, we're all uniform in our thoughts, it's bad. We've closed our minds. So even though we think we want to be unified, we need to leave enough space for us to have our own thoughts and new ideas. Otherwise, we're going to keep doing things that don't work, or keep doing things that worked at one time, but now they're not working anymore. We keep doing them.
Right. Like you eliminate probability for like adjustments or updates or evil. Is that like that's essentially the echo chamber, right? I mean, I don't know if the echo chamber
100%
expression was
that's the echo chamber
cracking back then.
So back to the book. Doing the wrong things for the wrong reasons brings us back to the ship of fools. Wide readership of this little book could do much for the betterment of mankind. So we don't want to be on the ship of fools. We want to do the right things for the right reasons, not the wrong things for the wrong reasons. And again, that was Giles Lauren. Don't know who that is. I'll have to research it. Okay, so the first chapter here, it's called History and Truth. Fools, said Bismarck. say they learn by experience. I prefer to profit by other people's experience, right? I don't have to learn. I don't have to make the mistakes myself. The study of history offers that opportunity in the widest possible measure. It is universal experience, infinitely longer, wider, and more varied than any individual's experiences. So, of course, how are you going to be able to learn in your lifetime from experience what you could get from an infinite number of experiences of other people and from history? How often do people claim superior wisdom on the score of their age and experience? The Chinese especially regard age with veneration and hold that a man of 80 years or more must be wiser than others. But 80 is nothing for a student of history. There is no excuse for anyone who is not illiterate if he is less than 3,000 years old in the mind. So if you're studying and you're reading, you're getting older. You're getting more experience, getting wiser. The main developments that took the general staffs by surprise in World War I could have been deduced from a study of the successive preceding wars in the previous half century. Why were they not deduced? Partly because the general staff study was too narrow, partly because they were blinded by their own professional interests and sentiments. So he's saying if you looked at the previous wars, you'd have seen, World War I, we can see what's about to go down. Look at the Civil War, the American Civil War. You were getting close to that idea of trench warfare. It was getting there. So you could have probably looked at it and said, we need to make some adjustments, but we didn't. History is the record of man's steps and slips. It shows us that the steps have been slow and slight, the slips quick and abounding. It provides us with the opportunity to profit by the stumbles and tumbles of our forerunners. Great, if we pay attention to it. The catalog of, and by the way, obviously I'm skipping through parts of this and hitting the highlights. The catalog of cataclysmic happenings, of history-changing accidents is endless. But among all the factors which produce sudden changes in the course of history, the issues of war have been the least accidental. This is a very important point. So he's saying, look, throughout history, there's all these times where there's like a mistake or there's an accident that happens and it kind of changes the course of history. But with war has the least impact from accident and from chance. So what is it? And he says, in reality, the reason has had a greater influence. Reason has had a greater influence than fortune on the issue of the wars that have most influenced history. Creative thought has often counted for more than courage, for more even than gifted leadership. This is very interesting, right? We talk about leadership being the most important thing on the battlefield. Now, in my opinion, part of leadership is creativity, but he's categorizing them as, well, three different things. You've got courage that he talks about, you got creativity, and you got leadership. He's saying creativity is the most important thing, which is very interesting. Now, again, for me, I think of a good leader is going to be a creative leader. He's not categorizing that way. Courage, he's, we got to be courageous, but that's not what's going to change the battlefield. Fast forward a little bit. It helps us to realize that there are two forms of practical experience, direct and indirect, and that of the two, indirect practical experience may be more valuable because it's infinitely wider. So like the fact that you have a lot of experience, it's narrow. But indirect experience, when you learn from someone else, it's going to be a lot wider span. Even in the most active career, especially a soldier's career, the scope and possibilities of direct experience are extremely limited. In contrast to the military, the medical profession has incessant practice. Yet the great advances in medicine and surgery have been due to the scientific thinker, or due more to the scientific thinker and researcher than to the practitioner. Direct experience is inherently too limited to form an adequate foundation either for theory or application. That's very interesting, right? Yeah. So in war, how often does a soldier get to fight? Yeah. The fact is, not as often as a surgeon. Dr. Luke, he's performing 2-3 surgeries a day, every day. So you would think, well, you can't really assess how much you learn from being a soldier because you don't get to conduct soldiering all the time. You're not on campaign. You're not in combat all the time. In fact, you spend a very small part of your career, in most cases, in combat. Yeah. Whereas a surgeon, they're doing that job every day. Yeah. So you have the whole spectrum. Someone that does their job rarely, comparatively speaking, and someone that does their job every day. And he's saying in both cases, the people that are detached a little bit can have a better understanding and actually make progress. Now, I would have to check with, Dr. Peter Attia and say, hey, what kind of advancements have come from the surgeons that are in there every single day? Because maybe this is, this is an older assessment. This is 1944. But it does make sense that if you're in there, like on the grind, cutting people open and doing the surgery, that's work. And you're trying to get that job done. Whereas someone on the outside that's a little bit detached is looking at that going, hey, you know what? The way you're doing that surgery there's probably a better way to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. It feels like, and I feel like it's obvious, but it's like one of those, the difference between learning in the classroom and then learning in the field, right? On the job experience versus like classroom learning or whatever. But they're like, so they're essentially saying the classroom learning, for lack of a better term, right, is you can broadly understand more. But the on-the-job training, why we give it so much credit is because tactically, like when you actually have to do the thing that you're studying, you can learn more ways to troubleshoot, and you can kind of, there's in and of itself, there's a whole different type of learning, which gives rise to a whole different type of knowledge.
Yeah. Imagine this. I was going to use jiu-jitsu as an example. Yeah. And I was like, well, if you're a person that just rolls all the time and doesn't drill and doesn't learn new technique, you're going to get overcome. But you take that to an even more extreme. If the only way you learned to fight was just by actually fighting, like to the death, no one would be any good at fighting. Yeah. Like the best person would just be the biggest, strongest person that was fast.
They'd be tough, dude.
Right.
Yeah, you'd need to be.
They'd be tough, but they wouldn't have developed any techniques.
Yeah.
You develop those techniques by breaking them down and stopping and retraining. And then you take someone like John Danaher, who is not like known as a competitor in jiu-jitsu, but he's a thinker and an analyst of jiu-jitsu. And so you watch him and you go, oh, or you see his progression in jiu-jitsu and the way he's taken in formulated systems and overcome challenges on the mat by teaching people and breaking down techniques. So even though if John Danaher would have been just like competing and in camp, never mind just like fighting other humans, right? If he's fighting other humans, he would have been discovered probably 1,000th of the things that he's discovered by watching videos and by analyzing and by watching his competitors compete. Yeah. So I think this is actually a pretty accurate statement.
Yeah, to me it does make sense. Yeah, especially put that way.
Yeah. Now listen, this doesn't mean you can be someone that never gets on the mats at all, right? You have to be able to, you have to feel it, you have to understand it, you have to have done it before you can say, okay, I have the context that we're working in, and now I can look at it from an outside perspective. And you probably do have to get in there. So I'm sure John Danaher to this day like goes, oh, let me try this move. Let me get on, hold on, put me in half guard. Yeah. He has to say that to this day. Let me feel it.
Yeah, fully. And, it feels obvious again that the best is going to get good at something, and good like from a holistic approach where it's like good as in I'm good at doing it and I'm good at teaching it and I'm good at understanding it. Like the whole goodness of it is going to be from both learning in the classroom, quote unquote, and in the field. Yeah. That seems obvious. Yeah. And so Danaher, good example where he's not a competitor, but I feel like he is kind of by proxy in a way where he uses his you know how he's like really in touch with his competitors' styles and ways and strengths and weaknesses. I feel like he kind of uses his competitors as his own like tools, to be out there. Like if he has to troubleshoot in the field, like in a competition or in sparring or something like that, he's watching and looking at his competitors, so he's kind of doing it by proxy in a way.
But even that, if he was competing, he wouldn't see from the outside. Like it helps me a lot when I'm watching someone. Like we were doing rounds the other day with Greg Train and Dr. Luke. Oh, yeah. And we were just doing guard passing, like no stopping. And, if you win, you stay. If you lose, you're out. Yeah. So, every time I'm out, I'm watching and I'm seeing like, oh, I see what Greg Train's doing over there. Oh, I see how Dr. Luke's doing that. Yeah. So when you're on the outside and then you start to figure out little remedies and you go in and try it. So you have to do I think the answer here is like, you got to do both. You got to participate, but you can't just participate. You've got to take a step back and say, hold on, how is this happening? Why is this happening? You got to observe things from the outside if you want to learn and get proficient at them. And most important, if you want to advance the technique. Yeah. Because look, if you're just working on your arm bar, the best way to work on your arm bar, once you know the technique, is to drill it. If you're doing a hand surgery on the third knuckle or whatever, you want to get good at that, keep doing that surgery. Yeah. But if you want to find a new technique, you got to observe that thing from the outside. Mm-hmm. Got to detach a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. And even, I guess it feels like, again, it's like tactical and strategic. So like the strategic will be like the detached kind of perspective, and the tactical, like you can't, if you have a lot of experience doing something like a plumber, we'll say, right? You get a plumber who's been working for 40 years as a plumber, freaking 3 calls a day, every day, 7 days a week. Yeah. Bro, that guy's going to go into any plumbing situation and he's going to know, like, I know, I see the leak is coming right. It looks like it's coming from here, but this is how you can tell, right? Because it's happened like 4 times. Meanwhile, the guy who just studied plumbing, he knows all the things, but he can't troubleshoot in that way, in the field, so it's like, they're like, it's a broader understanding within a broad understanding kind of a thing. So they kind of go hand in hand in a way,
Got to do both.
Yeah, ideally.
Got to do both. Fast forward a little bit. Soldiers universally concede the general truth of Napoleon's much quoted dictum that in war, quote, the moral is to the physical as 3 to 1, end quote. The actual arithmetic proportion may be worthless, for morale is apt to decline if weapons are inadequate, and the strongest will is of little use if it is inside a dead body. But although the moral and physical factors are inseparable and indivisible, the saying gains its enduring value because it expresses the idea of the predominance of moral factors in all decisions. Fast forward. For any historian, it is a valuable experience to have lived in the world of affairs and seen bits of history in the making. This is what we're talking about. You have to, as a historian, you have to have fought. You can't talk about jiu-jitsu unless you train jiu-jitsu. And really, unless you've competed before, it's really hard for you to talk about competition. Not the least part of its value comes from seeing the importance of accidental factors, a touch of liver, a thick head, a sudden tiff, a domestic trouble, or the intervention of lunch hour. So what is he talking about there? It goes into this big example of meetings and like lunch hour and how the meeting is unfolding and how no one wants to make a decision until like lunch is in 15 minutes, and then all of a sudden people start getting real serious about like, all right, let's go ahead and let's make this decision. Yeah. And he even talks about how someone that's a good leader will like not really present a final conclusion until it's almost lunch. Yeah. And then he kind of rolls in and says, well, I'd like to present these options. And everyone goes, oh, you know what? I'm hungry. Yep, we agree.
Right. So he kind of uses that as an additional element of strategy that can be like taught. And like stuff that you can only learn in the field. Like, because, okay, so you know how like we'll get into, we'll say debates, me and you or whatever. Not a debate, whatever, debates. Okay. And this expression, which my brother J. Charles kind of turned me on to, is like in a vacuum. They say in a vacuum, which just means like, in theory, like, and it's all correct in a vacuum, but you're not accounting for everyday things that come up that are not part of the curriculum as far as what you're talking about or whatever. And that's exactly what that is, where it's like, you got to take into account. And a lot of these war books that you read actually talk about those things where it's like, hey, this is all true. Ideally, you want to do this and react this way and all this stuff, but you have to take into account morale, like all these unwritten things that can come up under certain circumstances, but not necessarily.
And that's exactly what we're talking about. A thick head. Like, oh, this sounds cool, but my commander was an idiot.
Yeah.
Or my sergeant that I told to go execute this was dumb. Or, I told the 2 platoons to go make this happen, but they're in he says a sudden tiff. They get in an argument about something, now it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Or I told Echo to go handle this. Well, he's having domestic trouble. Now he's taking it out on his troops and they don't get the job done.
Yeah.
And he talks about how these little personal things just throw these theories out the window. And he's going to go even harder with this. He says, experience has also given me some light into the processes of manufacturing history, artificial history. The product is less transparent than a silk stocking. Nothing can deceive like a document. Here lies the value of the war of 1914 to 1918 as a training ground for historians. Governments opened their archives, statesmen and generals their mouths in time to check the records by personal examination of other witnesses. After 20 years' experience of such work, pure documentary history seems to me akin to mythology. And he starts talking about that. Many are the gaps to be found in official archives, token of documents destroyed later to conceal what might impair a commander's reputation. More difficult to detect are forgeries, with which some of them have been replaced. On the whole, British commanders do not seem to have been capable of more ingenuity than mere destruction or antedating of orders. The French were often more subtle. A general could safeguard the lives of his men as well as his own reputation by writing orders based on a situation that did not exist for an attack that nobody carried out while everybody shared in the credit since the record went on file. There's an old story about the SEALs in Vietnam being told to do some ambush somewhere on some river deep in enemy territory, and they assessed that it was not a good mission. They pushed back up the chain of command. Hey, like, that's a dangerous area. We don't think there's going to be any activity. It's going to be hard to get in and out. And they're like, no, do it. And so the SEALs were like, okay, roger that. And they patrolled outside the wire, 100 yards and sat in the jungle for 6 hours and then patrolled back out that 100 yards and said, yep, we didn't see anything. Mm-hmm. Same thing you see in Band of Brothers, where Dick Winters is getting ordered to go do another reconnaissance across the river. Does it, loses a guy, has a few other casualties, comes back, didn't find anything out. And by the way, the war is about over. Like, the documents are all but signed. His commander's like, do it again tonight. And he says, sir, I don't recommend that. We took casualties. You do it again tonight. Because roger that, sir. And they go into the cellar of a house and they get drunk.
Yeah.
Famous American historian Henry Adams wrote this: I have written too much history to believe in it. So if anyone wants to differ from me, I am prepared to agree with him. Chuck. All right. Now we're going to start to rip into some of these authoritative schools, he calls them. It seems hardly possible that the authoritative schools of military thought could have misunderstood as completely as they did the evolution that was so consistently revealed throughout the wars of the 19th and 20th centuries. So how did they get this so wrong? A review of the record of error suggests that the only possible explanation is that their study of war was subjective, not objective. But even if we can reduce the errors of the past in the writing and teaching of military history by soldiers, the fundamental difficulty remains. Faith matters so much to a soldier in the stress of war that military training inculcates a habit of unquestioning obedience, which in turn fosters an unquestioning acceptance of the prevailing doctrine. While fighting is a most practical test of theory, it is a small part of soldiering. And there is far more in soldiering that tends to make men the slaves of a theory. So yeah, you're in the military and you're going to get trained. This is what we do, and you've got to believe in what you're doing. Moreover, the soldier must have faith in his power to defeat the enemy. Hence, to question, even on material grounds, the possibility of a successful attack is a risk to faith. So if you look at me and you're like, hey, Jocko, I don't know if we can actually succeed in charging up that hill with the machine gun nest at the top. That's you doubting that you can do it. So you don't even want to say that. Doubt is unnerving, save to philosophic minds. And armies are not composed of philosophers, either at the top or the bottom. So since I've told you and I've trained you, like, dude, we need that faith. We need to believe in ourselves. And you're looking at this hill going, man, I see like a machine gun nests, couple machine gun nests with interlocking fields of fire and not much cover for us going up there. I don't know if this is possible. That's like a sin for you to question this, right? If we're not careful. In no activity is optimism so necessary for success, for it deals largely with the unknown, even unto death. The margin that separates optimism from blind folly is narrow. So we have to be careful of that. Like, I think we can do this, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this. Huh? Well, really?
Yeah. It's essentially your dichotomy of leadership, right? Yes. The, foolhardy and brave. Yes.
On the one side is optimism. I think we can make this happen. Staring up at maybe a machine gun nest that we've got some cover on the way up. There's some trenches that we can get through. There's some terrain features we can use. We can put some fires on it beforehand. Okay, I think we can do this. And then you go too far, it becomes folly, which is like, hey, we're going.
Bad move.
Yeah. Thus, there is no cause for surprise that soldiers have so often overstepped it and become victims of their faith. So that's what happens.
Yeah.
We believe, we have so much optimism that we can make this happen, and we end up getting killed because of it. The soldier could hardly face the test defined in the motto of the famous Lung Ming Academy, a motto that headed each page of the books used there. Quote, "The student must first learn to approach the subject in a spirit of doubt." End quote. That's really good. It's a good idea. Echo, charge up that hill. Your first thought should be doubt. I don't know if I can do that, actually.
Yeah.
The point had been still more clearly expressed in the 11th century teachings of Chang Sai. Quote, "If you can doubt at points where other people feel no impulse to doubt, then you are making progress." End quote. Now I'm going to tell you my realistic assessment of this is what you need on your team is people with both attitudes. You need someone that kind of thinks you can make anything happen. And you need someone that thinks we're all going to die. And you got to actually listen to both of them with an open mind and figure out, like, okay, I think I see where this goes. Okay, yeah, Echo's got a good point. The enemy is in a way superior position with terrain. But Fred's got a good point too. We can put suppressive fire and they're not going to be able to do it. So you got to really open your mind and hear both the doubters and the glass is overflowing half full. Yeah. Another reason, and this is all under the subject heading of, what's this chapter called? History and the Truth. So this is why we don't get to the truth in history. One of them in the next section here is called The Fear of Truth. We learn from history that in every age and every clime, the majority of people have resented what seems in retrospect to have been purely matter-of-fact comment on their institutions. So when you say something bad about our institutions, someone says something bad about jiu-jitsu, like you have a resentment immediately.
Yes.
Somebody says something bad about Hawaii, we're automatically mad. Right?
It's very true.
We learn, too, that nothing has aided the persistence of falsehoods and the evils resulting from it more than the unwillingness of good people to admit the truth when it was disturbing to their comfortable assurance. So when someone says, bro, why are you doing it like that? And you say, because we've always done it this way. That is when we have the truth not being followed, not being discovered even. always the tendency continues to be shocked by natural comment and to hold certain things too sacred to think about. Oh, I got to be careful of that, right? Man, in the beginning, like, do you remember when in jiu-jitsu when footlocks were like bad?
Yeah.
Yeah. So even you remember that.
Yeah.
And when did you start that train?
2005.
Oh, yeah.
Official.
I mean, imagine when I was sitting back there in 1996 with Dean Lister breaking people's feet.
Yeah.
And people were like, this footlocks do not work. I would hear jiu-jitsu people say that.
Yeah.
Footlocks do not work.
In the spirit of complete accuracy, it wasn't all footlocks. The regular straight footlock was okay. Because this is why I think.
So rewind another 5 years or 10 years, even the straight footlock.
Yeah, it's not the jam.
This does not work. Hey, because it just hurts, but the person can still like punch you in the face, so therefore it's not a good move. We shouldn't be doing them.
Yeah.
Why would you give up position? Why would you sit back?
Yeah.
You're on top. Don't go for a footlock. They don't work.
You know why? And this is just me. No one even told me this, but this is what I just assumed. So I could literally have been wrong this whole time, even though I still feel this like more on an emotional level where, okay, so I always thought that the straight footlock was fine because literally the way I learned it was from Hoist and Hicks and Gracie back in the day in the tapes, you know, but that was it. There's no heel hooks or, this kind of stuff. But I always thought it was because they're frowned upon or they don't count or they don't have like the legitimacy is because you don't have to earn the position to achieve it. So if you want to armbar, you can't just be in a neutral or like disengaged position, kind of a thing.
You got to be in the game.
Yeah, you got to pass his guard to get the mount, to get the armbar, or you got to get the guy's back for the choke, Where footlock, you kind of don't. He can be holding you in your guard, and you can just sort of get the footlock without passing guard, without gaining superior position, kind of a thing. That's what I always thought. I thought that's why it was frowned upon.
Yeah. Well, there was a time where it was just totally frowned upon.
The whole deal.
Mean, the whole jam.
Yeah, they'd like throw shoes at you. Right?
Oh yeah, it was crazy. And so
funny.
It was sacred. It was too sacred to even talk about. Like, hey, do you think that they might be effective? Like, no. Just be quiet.
Yeah.
That's not jiu-jitsu, by the way.
Yeah.
And you're right, though. If you watch, I forget which it's like UFC 1 or 2 when Hoist fought against Ken Shamrock. Ken Shamrock goes for, he's going for his foot, whether he's going for a heel hook or footlock. And Hoist, with masterful technique, like immediately defends it. The kind of defense where he clearly fully understood the footlock and heel hook procedures.
Yep.
And that was in 1993 or 1994.
Yeah.
So Ken Shamrock, and by the way, Ken Shamrock and that school, the Lions Den school, they were very versed in footlocks and heel hooks because they came from Japan, and there was that whole lineage of catch wrestling and heel hooks and footlocks over in Japan. So Ken Shamrock was legit. But when you go back and watch that, like when I watched it at the time, I was pure jiu-jitsu guy. And so I thought, oh, well, the footlock doesn't work. Because look, that guy tried it and it didn't work at all.
Yeah.
But what you realize when you go back 5 years later, you go, oh, no, Hoist knows how to defend that.
Yeah.
Like 100%.
Oh, yeah.
Knew and had the awareness. That's what impresses me.
Yeah.
Because he had the awareness that he went for that footlock. And boom, he was on it. He was defending it immediately.
Yeah.
And it worked out bad for, like, Ken Shamrock did exactly what we all thought. It reinforced the position. You say, oh, you see what happens when you go for a footlock?
Right.
The guy comes on top now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sacred.
Yeah. And you're right about Ken Shamrock being legit because if I'm not mistaken, same exact event, that was UFC 1, right? He got Pat Smith in the heel hook. And, jammed him up pretty good.
Yeah.
So, you're right. But, you're right. Like, you can't react with that kind of timing if foot locks aren't part of training.
No. He knew it.
Yeah, he knew. Well, it goes along with what you always say. You say, hey, if you don't like them, if you don't like that part of the game, then learn to defend against them, right? Boom, there you go.
I can conceive of no finer ideal of a man's life than to face life with clear eyes instead of stumbling through it like a blind man, an imbecile, or a drunkard, which in a thinking sense is the common preference. How rarely does one meet anyone whose first reaction to anything is to ask, is it true? Yet unless that is a man's natural reaction, it shows that truth is not uppermost in his mind, and unless it is, true progress is unlikely. This idea of just constantly thinking like, well, what I am hearing, is it true? Is it true?
Yeah.
Is it accurate? Where does it come from? In 1935, a distinguished German general contributed to the leading military organ of his country an article entitled, "Why Can't We Camouflage?" It was not, as might be supposed, an appeal to revive and develop the art of deceiving the eye with the object of concealing troop movements and positions. The camouflage which the author wished to see adopted in the German army was the concealment of the less pleasing facts of history. He deplored the way that, after World War I, the diplomatic documents were published in full, even to the Kaiser's marginal comments. So like, oh, you're looking back at history. Don't say the bad stuff. Say the good stuff. This camouflaged history not only conceals faults and deficiencies that could otherwise be remedied, but it engenders false confidence, and false confidence underlies most of the failures that military history records. It is the dry rot of armies, but its effects go wider and are felt earlier, for the false confidence of military leaders has been a spur to war. So when you do something and you cover it up and you're like, oh no, actually that didn't really happen, we actually did great, and then by the way, that enables people into the thinking of like, well, we're really good, we're better than we are. And what do we do then? We go to fight when we shouldn't. This section's called the Evasion of Truth. The history of 1914 to 1918 is full of examples. Passchendaele perhaps provides the most striking. It is clear from what Haig said beforehand that his motive was a desire to, and a belief that he could, win the war single-handed in 1917 by a British offensive in Flanders before the Americans arrived. So you got Haig in charge of the Brits, and he says, well, look, we can win one big push in 1917 before the Americans even show up. By the time he was ready to launch it, all the conditions had changed, and the chief French commanders expressed grave doubts. So the French are going, hey, dude, it's not going to work. Yet in his eagerness to persuade a reluctant British cabinet to allow him to fulfill his dream, he disclosed none of the unfavorable facts which were known to him and exaggerated those that seemed favorable. Just lying. Oh, don't worry, we'll be able to do this. Oh, we have plenty of ammunition. Oh, their lines are weak over here. Like, it's just lies. When his offensive was launched on the last day of July, it failed completely on the part that was most vital. Yet, he reported to London that the results were, quote, most satisfactory. The weather broke that very day, and the offensive became bogged. This is freaking just terrible, right? This is when you get the commanders are telling the happy story about what's going on. Oh yeah, the South Vietnamese army is improving. They're getting better. Oh, the Iraqi soldiers are getting better. The Afghan forces are really coming together, and they're really supportive. It's like no, it's not true. Oh yeah, we launched this offensive. It went great. No, it didn't go great. When the prime minister, becoming anxious at the mounting toll of casualties, went over to Flanders, Haig argued that the poor physique of the prisoners then being taken was proof that his offensive was reducing the German army to exhaustion. So the prime minister goes over to Flanders and says, like, dude, it doesn't seem like this is going well. And Haig says, no, you got to go see the German prisoners. Look at what rough shape they are. You're going to be able to see that this is working. When the prime minister asked to see one of the prisoners' cages, one of Haig's staff telephoned in advance to give instructions that, quote, all able-bodied prisoners were to be removed from the core cages before his arrival. The chain of deception continued, and the offensive went on until 400,000 men had been sacrificed. So that's like freaking capital punishment for this guy in my mind. Making it look like the Germans are all weak and injured and whatnot. It's just lies. In later years, Haig was wont to argue in excuse that his offensive had been undertaken at the behest of the French and that the possibility of the French army breaking up compelled me to go on attacking. But in his letters at the time, since revealed, he declared that its morale was excellent. And the following spring, he blamed the government when his own army, thus brought to the verge of physical and moral exhaustion, failed to withstand the German offensive. Haig was an honorable man according to his lights, but his lights were dim. The consequences which have made Passchendaele a name of ill omen may be traced to the combined effect of his tendency to deceive himself, his tendency, therefore, to encourage his subordinates to deceive him, and their, quote, loyal tendency to tell a superior what was likely to coincide with his desires. Boy, that's scary. So I am running around with my attitude, and I by my presence, when I go, Echo, how's it going down there? You look up at me and go, it's going great, sir.
Yeah.
Because you're loyal to me.
Yeah.
And because you're loyal to me, you're supporting what I'm doing. You want it to be going well, so you just tell me it's going well.
Yeah.
Passchendaele is an object lesson in this kind of well-meaning, if not disinterested, untruthfulness. As a young officer, I had cherished a deep respect for the higher command, but I was sadly disillusioned about many of them when I came to see them more closely from the angle of a military correspondent. It was saddening to discover how many apparently honorable men would stoop to almost anything to help their own advancement. Fast forward, a different habit with worse effect was the way ambitious officers, when they came in sight of promotion to the general's list, would decide that they would bottle up their thoughts and ideas as a safety precaution until they reached the top and they could put those ideas into practice. So I got some things, I want to keep my mouth shut until I get to the top. Then I'm going to tell everyone what's up. Unfortunately, the usual result after years of such self-repression for the sake of their ambition was that when the bottle was eventually uncorked, the contents had evaporated. I found that moral courage was quite as rare in the top levels of the services as among politicians. It was also a surprise to me to find that those who had shown the highest degree of physical courage tended to be those who were the most lacking in moral courage. And the clue to this seemed to be largely in the growing obsession with personal career ambition, particularly in the cases where an unhappy home life resulted in inordinate concern with their career prospects. The other main cause in diminishing moral courage, however, was a lack of private means that led commanding officers to wilt before their superiors because of concern with the problem of providing for their children's education. So you had, on the one hand, someone that just like has a crappy home life, and so they're just trying to get promoted. Or the other end of the spectrum is, I'm trying to take care of my family, so I better get promoted so I get more money. I don't want to lose my job. Now, I used the word loyalty in air quotes earlier. And this section is called blinding loyalties. We learn from history that those who are disloyal to their own superiors are most prone to preach loyalty to their subordinates. Loyalty is a noble quality so long as it is not blind and does not exclude the higher loyalty to the truth and decency. But the word is much abused, for loyalty analyzed is too often a polite word for what would be more accurately described as a conspiracy for mutual inefficiency. In this sense, it is essentially selfish, like a servile loyalty, demeaning both to master and servant. And you see this all the time, right? Where you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. Is that considered loyalty? Questionable. It's a conspiracy for mutual inefficiency. these minor loyalties also invade the field of history and damage its fruits. Deep is the gulf between works of history as written and the truth of history, and perhaps never more so than in books dealing with military history. If one reason is that these are usually written by soldiers untrained as historians, and another that there is frequently some personal link, whether of acquaintance or tradition, between the author and the subject, a deeper reason lies in habit of mind. For the soldier, quote, my country, right or wrong, quote, must be a watchword. And this essential loyalty, whether it be to the country, to the regiment, or to the comrades, is so ingrained in him that when he passes from action to reflection, it is difficult for him to acquire instead the historian's single-minded loyalty to the truth. So you're writing about your buddies and you're like, oh, he was great. Oh, my boss was great. And my team was great. It's like, you got to be careful of that. Faith matters so much in time of crisis. One must have gone deep into history before reaching the conviction that truth matters more. Next section. It's called Government and Freedom. And again, this book is called Why Don't We Learn from History? So we just went through a bunch of military reasons, right? We're all covering for each other. No one wants to talk about it. We got these misplaced loyalties. We got all those things going on. The documentation, like there's all these things happening. And now we get into government and freedom.
These obvious, I mean, I would imagine you'd think this is normal or obvious, for lack of a better term, that this is, yeah, sure, it was a military, but bro, I was thinking about all kinds of other situations where it's like, hey, that idea applies to every kind of a lot of situations.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that whole, I mean, okay, so back to that loyal, what do you call it, inefficiency, commitment to
mutually supporting inefficiencies or whatever.
That's essentially like little side agendas, right? That you guys are collaborating on that goes against or may go against like the greater good of the the team, bro. That's everywhere. Guys, little collusion, those, I don't know, steal from the mailroom or I don't know, whatever the deal is, work, or even as kids, right? We'll sneak out at night together or something, something like that.
We plotting.
Or we'll go, we'll go sneak and, I don't know, grab some cookies out of the cookie jar together, you know. You get me one tonight, I'll get you one tomorrow, kind of a thing.
That's it.
Yeah.
And all those things end up hiding the truth.
Yeah.
That's what they end up doing.
Yeah.
So this section is called Government and Freedom. Blindfolded authority. All of us do foolish things, but the wiser realize what they do. The most dangerous error is failure to recognize our own tendency to error. That failure is a common affliction of authority. So we're going to make mistakes. We fail to make. That's like Extreme Ownership, the book. I wrote the book with Leif Babin.
Sure.
Going back to the other thing, like, we want to paint ourselves in the best light.
Yeah.
It's like, actually, we want to tell the truth about what's happening. That's why the opening chapter of that is, hey, we had a blue on blue, killed a friendly Iraqi soldier, had one of my SEALs get wounded, had a few other friendly Iraqi soldiers get wounded. Like, all that is a rough thing to put out. But guess what? I made mistakes. Those mistakes need to be accounted for. To sit there and think, oh, well, no, I did everything perfect. It's like, no, did not. So that's the same, that's one of the themes in the books isn't, hey, here's what we did awesome. It's actually, here's what we messed up.
Yeah.
Same thing with dichotomy of leadership, same thing with leadership strategy and tactics. It's like, oh, here's some mistakes that I made. Here's some things that I could have done better. Here's some lessons learned. Now, I'll tell you, there's times where it's like, oh, do I rat out somebody else, some other unit? No, we're not ratting out other units. Like, oh, well, they could have done this better. It's like, no, we don't need to say that. They're not here to discuss it.
Right.
But as far as what we did wrong, yeah, we cleared hot.
Yeah.
The other thing is, when you debrief, whether it's a SEAL platoon or whether you debrief getting back from an operation, bro, there's no sugarcoating. Like if something happened on a mission and, there's confusion, there's like this happened a lot in Ramadi where people are confused on where the friendlies are and friendlies are shooting at friendlies, right? Blue on blue potential situations.
Yeah.
Interestingly, there's the opening blue on blue in Extreme Ownership. Well, Leif and I we kind of outlined what chapters we were going to write about or what subjects we were going to write about. And we were both kind of pulling stories from Ramadi individually. And it turns out Leif wrote a chapter where he's talking about Chris Kyle is looking at an individual, an unknown individual that has a scoped weapon inside of a building where there's not supposed to be any friendlies. And Chris, as a sniper, is like, hey, I see someone with a scoped weapon. Well, there was snipers in Ramadi, enemy snipers in Ramadi. So Chris is, hey, I see someone with a scoped weapon in that building. They're in this window. Leif, do we have friendlies in there? And so Leif is calling back to the army saying, hey, do you have any friendlies in this particular building? The army says, no, we don't. And they're saying, kill that guy. Because guess what? Guess who's killing army soldiers? Enemy snipers. So they're telling Leif to tell Chris, kill that guy. Like, take him out. And Chris didn't feel comfortable with it. And Leif continued to say, hey, hold on, let's review this. And finally, what Leif ends up doing is saying, hey, we don't feel comfortable taking a shot. Can you assault that building? And when they said that, it became like, I think the guys left the building that Chris was looking at. So basically it became very clear that those were friendlies that Chris was looking at. So there's a blue on blue. He writes about, like Leif writes about them. Meanwhile, I wrote a chapter where an Army Bradley, which is like a small tank with a 25 millimeter chain gun on it that can reap all kinds of havoc, is calling back to the combat outpost saying, hey, we see people with scoped weapons on top of such and such a building 43 in this block. And so they ask me, hey, Jocko, do you, and this is in the tactical, in the combat outpost. So I've got guys out in a building and they say, hey, Jocko, do you have any guys in building 43? And I'm like, no. I don't, because I'm sitting there looking at my map. I can know where my guys are. They're in building, 58. And so the guy's like, okay, well, we have people with scoped weapons. Now we're very blue on blue paranoid. Yeah. So I said, hold on a second. What building are you saying? He goes, building 43 right here. And I'm looking at the battle map. I'm like, okay. And so finally I said, hey, ask the Bradley to count the number of buildings from where he is, because we knew where he was, count the number of buildings up. And he's like, stand by. And it sounded like a ridiculous request, right? Are you serious? You want us to count the number of buildings? And so, all right, stand by. And he comes back. He's like, actually, correction. It's not building 43. It's building 58 or whatever the numbers were. So what I'm saying is both of us were talking about these blue on blues. And there was another blue on blue that was the opening chapter. So there's a lot of this stuff happening. My point in telling you all this is, when we'd come back from those operations or even that particular situation, like we're going to debrief that. There's no holds barred. It's not like you can't let that stuff slide. So even though historically, in Extreme Ownership, I'm not like, and by the way, this particular soldier was saying, can we engage those, people on the rooftop of building 43? Like, no, that guy made a mistake. There's no reason to call people out. They were doing the best they could. In that debrief, like, it's like, hey, what were you thinking? Why did you do this? How can we better mark our position? What could we do to make sure this doesn't happen? So even though in history these things might get softened, man, on the battlefield in the debrief, you cannot allow them to get softened. You have to be hard on each other, and most important, to the key point of this whole book, truthful with each other to say, hey, this is bad. I know Leif and I think it was Leif and Dave. Leif got, had a enemy tank. Sorry, not an enemy tank. An Iraqi tank, like firing at them. Like it's scary, and we have to be very careful and make sure that we tell each other the truth to prevent these things from happening. So like I said, I guess my point in saying on the battlefield, that truth is going to be a lot more direct and it's a lot more critical because lives are at stake. And then in these historical books, well, maybe these people are looking out for their friends and not wanting to make someone look bad and wanting to keep their boss from, having any collateral damage, that type of stuff.
Yeah, and that makes sense, I think anyway, because, when you're in the heat of battle, like the objective seems a lot more clear and available in your head. So, just because someone said, hey, you made a bad move, you're not, like, distracted by the fact that you said that about me, because the mission is so clear and so in front of your face, as opposed to later on, everything's settled down, you've settled in as a person.
And by the way, this doesn't give you the right to be an asshole because if it's like, hey, what the hell was your Bradley driver thinking? What the hell was wrong? No, it's like, what did we do wrong? Hey, your Bradley driver thought we were in the wrong building. He should have been able to identify that we were friendlies and not even thought for a second. We should have had some better marking. So what can we do better? Again, the idea of extreme ownership is real. And even in combat, even though you're saying like, oh, well, it's really intense and all that, people still have the same mechanisms that they have in regular life. So if I go, Echo, what were you doing pointing your weapon over there? Your idea isn't going to be, oh, well, I made a mistake. No, you're going to get defensive. And you're going to say, well, how are we supposed to know where you were? You weren't even marking your position correctly. So I don't go at you like that. I say, hey, Echo, and notice that you had your Bradley 25 millimeter chain gun trained on my guys. Clearly, I did a bad job of letting you know where they are, and we're not doing a good job of marking our positions. What can we do to make sure that this doesn't happen again? And now your mind is opened up. So the principle, they apply whether you're in combat, whether you're in business, it doesn't matter. Taking ownership is how you actually move forward to find a solution. Pointing fingers and blaming other people, nothing gets solved. Nothing gets solved within the own team, like in our platoon, nothing gets solved, but nothing gets solved external from the platoon if the platoon is pointing their fingers at everybody else. So caution must be used.
That's so crazy how the details of, we'll say, communication and those whole dynamics where, like, your example of like, oh, what were you doing pointing your machine gun? See, even that tone right there kind of like ventured off into like a personal tone where it was like you got off of all business, which like that's what being direct, in my opinion, or as far as I understand it. When you're direct, you're just direct. You're not sugarcoating it with like, overall a great job, but this one little teeny tiny tweak, like that's like sugarcoating it, right? But if you're direct, you're like, you don't say good job. There's no need to necessarily say good job right now because we're trying to solve this problem, and that's the kind of the direct mission at that point. So you'll say, hey, like this was the wrong move. Why did you do it that way? Or why did you do it that way? Because we know it was the wrong move, kind of a thing. But if you start going personal, because that's all business, right? Direct is all business. But if you go personal, like, what are you, a moron? That's personal. Like, Brad, why do you have to call me names? Kind of a thing. But then it goes all the way down to even the tone that you're using, 100%. Kind of a thing. And I think most of us too, we're kind of calibrated to a degree, I guess, that we can tell if someone's using a certain tone because they're mad at me versus if they're just mad and excited about the situation, even though I'm sure there's some overlap there.
But the principles apply. Like, that's why your tone and your words are important. They matter, but if and that's why taking ownership is such a huge piece, because when you take ownership, you're automatically aiming that tone at yourself.
And therein lies like even how you would explain to me where, because I would let it slip, like in my own head, where I'm like, the idea of really taking ownership and then acting like you're taking ownership, there's a big difference.
There's a big difference.
As subtle as it may be sometimes, that's a huge difference. So if I'm acting like I'm taking ownership, that means now I got to act with my tone and be not as genuine or not genuine, really. But if you truly take ownership, you truly think, like, it'll just naturally come out as genuine.
And that's the point. When I'm talking to the platoon commander or the company commander in charge of that Bradley, my true belief is we need to do a better job of marking our position so that we don't get mistaken for Mujahideen fighters and get blasted with a 25 millimeter chain gun. That's the actual truth that I believe. Now, when I present that to them, they're also going to say, we need to do a better job understanding the picture of the battlefield and understanding what your guys look like. and letting our team know that we have SEALs out there. They're probably going to be on a rooftop, and they're definitely have scoped weapons. Like, these are things, even that right there, if the friendly forces know, oh, hey, there's SEALs operating in the area, they're on rooftops, they're in the vicinity of this area, that's going to immediately give everyone a second thought before they engage, right? Oh, you see somebody with scope weapons on the rooftop, oh, we know SEALs are out here. Okay, let's check in and confirm what we're looking at. Yeah. So spreading that word, and when you take ownership, the other side takes ownership as well, and you come up with a better solution.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like you shift it immediately over to the collaboration approach versus the competition approach, you know?
Yeah, or the accusatory approach.
Yeah, which is,
like,
so
hey, we're doing everything right. You guys need to fix yourselves. Like, no.
Like, we're good. Yeah, you're wrong. So it's like more of a competitive, like,
Yeah, don't do that. All right, pushing forward. This section is about government and freedom. And I already mentioned the opening here. All of us do foolish things, but the wiser realize what they do. The most dangerous error is failure to recognize our own tendency to err. That failure is a common affliction of authority. So when you're in charge, you think you're right more often. From many examples may be cited, one from World War I, when reports percolate to Paris about the neglected state of the Verdun defenses, Joffre was asked for assurance that they would be improved. In reply, he indignantly denied that there was any cause for anxiety, and demanded the names of those who had dared to suggest it. And he said, and I quote, "I cannot be party to soldiers under my command bringing before the government by channels other than the hierarchical channel complaints or protests about the execution of my orders. It is calculated to disturb profoundly the spirit of discipline in the army," end quote. So let me give you a recap. They set up defenses around Verdun. And some guys on the front lines were like, hey, our defenses are weak here and here. We need to get them reinforced. And they sent that up that got to the government, not to the army, but to the government. And so Joffre, who's in charge, hears it. Someone goes, hey, dude, I heard that the defenses weren't that good in Verdun. Instead of saying, oh, I had not heard that. Let me go investigate. Let me go improve my defenses. Instead, he said, hey, who said that? I can't have someone ratting me out inside the army. And then it says, that reply might well be framed and hung up in all the bureaus of officialdom the world over to serve as the mummy at the feast. I had to look up what that meant, the mummy at the feast.
What does it mean? It
means that, I guess back in the day, there was people ate mummies almost. You know how you hear about someone eating like a rhinoceros horn for various medical, it's almost like a little magic power. Yeah. Well, apparently that used to be the deal with mummies. Like you could eat. And this was, by the way, I looked at it, was the British were doing this.
Okay.
Like some weird,
like a human mummy.
Yeah, like a human mummy.
Powers.
Like you get, they would grind it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very strange. But
okay, cool.
Yeah, the mummy at the feast. For within 2 months of this doctrine of infallibility collapsed like a punctured balloon with tragic effects for his army. So yeah, didn't work out well from Verdun, and this attitude is absolutely terrible. I give this feedback to leaders all the time. If you're getting negative feedback about what's happening, you should say thank you, and then you should go fix it. Yeah. You shouldn't say, who said that? I'm going to freaking get him fired.
Yeah.
The presence of infallibility is instinctive to a hierarchy. Ooh, we all think we know what we're doing. We learn this from history that the critics of authority have always been rebuked in self-righteous tones, if no worse fate has befallen them, yet have repeatedly been justified to history. To be against the government, that means against the government, may be a more philosophic attitude than it appears. For the tendency of all governments is to infringe the standards of decency and truth. This is inherent in their nature and hardly avoidable in their practice. So anyone that's criticizing the authority is has a tendency to get smashed. And people in authority have a tendency to smash them, which is the wrong move, by the way. Hence, the duty of the good citizen who is free from the responsibility of government is to be a watchdog upon it, lest the government impair the fundamental objects which it exists to serve. It is a necessary evil, thus requiring constant watchfulness and check. So that's one of the things that can keep us from knowing the truth, is that if you question what's happening, you will get smashed by the authorities. And authorities, people in authority positions, have a tendency to say, shut up, when they get some truth heading their way.
So like, McDojo life, right, Rob?
Yeah.
McDojo life. Isn't in concept, isn't that what he's kind of exposing a lot of it? Where like, how these demonstrations, these magical, mystical martial arts demonstrations, right? Yeah. And then you need a collaborator there. Like if I'm gonna freaking,
if you're gonna dim mock me,
you
need someone that's gonna fall down.
Yeah, exactly right. And it's like, what's the guy gonna do? Be like, I know it's only my first week here, but bro, I didn't feel the chi. Like when you're doing it to me, like I don't feel it. Like, bro, it's kind of intimidating. Probably tell you shut up. He'll probably hit you for real, punish you for it. I'm sure that's what goes on. See what I'm saying? Yeah. How else are you gonna organize people to just fake it like that? Those kind of numbers.
There's some weird McDojo life stuff out there in the world.
But when you think about this idea, it starts to make sense.
Yeah.
But I remember we took Aikido back in the day, and bro, I was scared of everybody, like all the instructors. Bro, I was scared. I'll do anything you say. You want me to fall down? Frick, I'll fall down. All good.
He didn't make me. How old were you when you did that?
I don't know, 6, 7 years old, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
Not for a long time. We just went.
Man,
that's how.
The UFC really cleaned up a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, that's a big.
But it's weird that it still exists in a big way.
It is weird.
It's because
it feels weird for us. I think
because back in the day, I would be like, Echo, if I poke you in this nerve center, it's going to paralyze your arm, and you'd be like, well, let me see, and I'd be like, I can't. You know what? I can't do it. Yeah. I can't do it. But you have, it would.
Yeah.
It would do it.
If you get a master at this
I had a guy like tell me that this karate chop to my neck would knock me out.
Yeah.
And I said, do it. Is no kidding. It's like a karate chop. But they had some bigger name for it, like brachial plexus. Something. They had some name for it. Yep. And I said, do it. I was like, yeah, go ahead. Let's do it. And he like, oh, I can't do it right now. And I said, no, like, do it.
Yeah.
And it didn't work.
Yeah.
A karate chop to the neck doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right about like why do we still? Because it's not like we see videos of this. That's really how we see it, right? These videos of these weird things, and then freaking it takes the same amount of effort to find these videos. You can find the videos of the people saying, "Hey, we don't believe this works." And some of them aren't even other martial artists. They're just people. Like these guys who be like, oh, I don't think that works. And so they go in and they're like, yeah, do it to me. It's like the no touch knockout stuff. Yeah. And like, do it to me. Like, they're not martial arts. Like, bro, I think they're like college kids.
Like he looks like he's this freaking linebacker. And there's a woman that's going to stop him from getting to her.
The running one? Yeah. He's running?
He like runs at her and just
bulldozes her.
Cleans her out.
Yeah, it's bad.
Did you ever hear that story about Higgs where a guy told Higgs that because of his chi, because of the other guy's chi, Higgs couldn't take him down? And Higgs is like, what do you mean? He goes, when I settle my chi, you will not be able to, take me down.
Yeah.
And Higgs is like, do you want to try it? And the guy's like, yeah. And so the guy takes a minute and settles his chi out. And then you know what Higgs did?
Take him down.
Freaking double leg. Double leg picked him up, slammed him. The chi didn't work.
Yeah.
But this is tangential to what we're talking about. Yeah. For sure.
But it actually, I think it's this idea in action, just in this other way.
Well, what you have to take it to is when someone says, hey, someone that's in the group says, hey, master, I didn't really feel like any disturbance. Right. And he's like, that's because you're not training hard enough. You know what I mean? Like, you shut up. I'm going to write you up. You're not going to get advanced until you can feel like that kind of thing.
Right.
So that's where it applies. Yes, directly.
Yeah. And I'm purporting that hypothesizing, we'll say that's what goes on internally. Otherwise, why would you do that? Or some version of that, or even it could just be the culture
you mean internally
of
why
fear.
the person gets knocked out, like allegedly by the death touch?
Yeah,
I
exactly
think it's
right.
this weird psychology, brainwashing, like group dynamics, I think.
Yeah.
And that's a really weird thing.
It is.
It's a very strange thing.
What's actually the real, to be honest, I kind of understand. I'm not saying it makes it cool or right, but I get how that happens. I get that. What I don't get is the master who ends up believing his own height and then goes and fights like an MMA guy. Like, you ever seen those where it's like, the master, he's like, no, my thing is like, I'm going to fight an MMA guy. And then he just gets beat down. Everyone knew it. Everyone knew that was going to happen. He gets beat down. That part I don't understand. I mean, I guess there's that
a pretty
level.
good one, like MMA fighter versus Aikido guy.
Yeah.
And the dude just, the Aikido guy is just getting punched in the head.
Oh, wait, is that the guy with the does he have a ponytail?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the thing that makes that one a little bit more clear and understandable is because if there's, I don't know if there's two versions or what, but there's one where the Aikido guy was saying, hey, I'm going to go test my Aikido against an MMA guy. I'm going to go test it. So it was almost like a genuine test, you know? He's like, I have this specific belief that my Aikido can basically get me through any combat scenario, and that's what I believe right now, so I'm going to go put it to the test. Fails the test, obviously, and then later he says, well, my Aikido system doesn't work as good as I thought or whatever. Like, he assesses it honestly at the end, you know? Yeah. I can see that.
I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, but that's the guy with the ponytail.
I just seen one with some guy getting his ass beat.
Oh, yeah, he gets beat down and like kind of, yeah.
And it's not even a beat down. It's just like, you know, probably 10 seconds of fighting, and then he pauses, and then another 5 seconds of fighting, and it's over.
Yeah, he's taking heavies though,
yeah,
and he gives up. He's like, well, no, I can't take this beating or whatever. Which, yeah, I mean, to me, kind of good on him. He was like,
well, he tried.
Yeah, he went and took his beating, you know, and I was like, oh fuck no. But you know, like there's one. I think it might have been in China or somewhere, where the guy, he was like a mystic monk, kung fu master versus like a regular MMA fighter from China or whatever, and the guy just beat him down.
Yeah.
Like, bro, everyone could, like, anyone, I think anyone could tell that guy was going to get beat down.
Yeah.
That part I didn't understand. That guy should have known better.
Yeah, well, you got enough times where you touch someone on the arm and they fall down, maybe you do start to believe it, I guess. Pretty disturbing.
I guess, right? Yeah.
Another problem with getting the truth and learning from history, restraints of democracy. We learn from history that democracy has commonly put a premium on conventionality. By its nature, it prefers those who keep step with the slowest march of thought and frowns on those who may disturb the conspiracy for mutual efficiency. Thereby, this system of government tends to result in the triumph of mediocrity and entails the exclusion of first-rate ability if this is combined with honesty. So it's saying in democracy, we're kind of like, hey, just keep doing what you're doing type thing. But the alternative to it, despotism, almost inevitably means the triumph of stupidity. And of the two evils, the former is less. And he says, what is of value in England and America, again, this is written in 1944, and worth defending is its tradition of freedom, the guarantee is of its vitality. Our civilization, like the Greek, has, for all its blundering way, taught the value of freedom, of criticism of authority, and of harmonizing with this order. Anyone who urges a different system for efficiency's sake is betraying the vital tradition. Freedom, the most important fact. Then it runs through some of the power politics. It talks about the men behind the scenes. So it talks about the influence of, like, you know, the cabinet members and the people that are friends with Churchill and with President Wilson and President Roosevelt. It talks about some of these behind the scenes people and just how they're influencing the whole scene, and you don't know a lot about them. It also talks about the pattern of dictatorship. We learn from history that self-made despotic rulers follow a standard pattern. In gaining power, they exploit, consciously or unconsciously, a state of popular dissatisfaction with the existing regime or of hostility between different sections of people. If we can get people to fight with each other inside of our own organization, we'll have a group that's dissatisfied, and that's going to help me out.
Yeah, the old divide and conquer.
They attack the existing regime violently and combine their appeal to discontent with unlimited promises. which, if successful, they fulfill only to a limited extent. They claim that they want absolute power for only a short time, but find subsequently that the time to relinquish it never comes. They excite popular sympathy by presenting the picture of a conspiracy against them and use this as a lever to gain a firmer hold at some crucial stage. On gaining power, they soon begin to rid themselves of their chief helpers, discovering that those who brought about the new order have suddenly become traitors to it. They suppress criticism on one pretext or another and punish anyone who mentions facts which, however true, are unfavorable to their policy. They enlist religion on their side if possible, or if its leaders are not compliant, foster a new kind of religion subservient to their ends. They spend public money lavishly on material works of a striking kind in compensation for the freedom of spirit and thought which they have robbed the public. They manipulate the currency to make the economic position of the state appear better than it is in reality. They ultimately make war on some other state as a means of diverting attention from the internal conditions and allowing discontent to outwardly explode. They use the rallying cry of patriotism as a means of riveting the chains of their personal authority more firmly on the people. They expand the superstructure of the state while undermining its foundations by breeding sycophants and at the expense of their self-respecting collaborators by appealing to the popular taste for the grandiose and sensational instead of true values, and by fostering a romantic instead of a realistic view, thus ensuring the ultimate collapse under their successors, if not themselves, of what they have created. This political confidence trick is itself a familiar string of tricks, has all been repeated down the ages. Yet it rarely fails to take in a fresh generation. Oh, what are we witnessing right now in the world? The psychology of dictatorship. We learn from history that time does little to alter the psychology of dictatorship, the effect of power on the mind of the man who possesses it, especially when he has gained it by successful aggression, tends to be remarkably similar in every age and in every country. He talks about Napoleon. He talks about Napoleon going to Russia, June of 1812. Napoleon's got 450,000 men heading into Russia. One of his quotes is, "In less than 2 months' time, Russia will be suing for peace." After 5 weeks of campaigning, despite this deep advance, he'd inflicted little damage on the enemy. That's because the Russians kept retreating. He believed there would be a battle because he wanted one. He believed that he should win it because it was essential that he should. September 14th, Napoleon reached Moscow and find that the Russians had evacuated the city, and there was great fires, and they pretty much burned much of the city, and destruction of Moscow by the Russians sobered Napoleon. October 25th, he gives orders to go back. By the time they get back, they're down to 50,000 people. And then this is what's crazy. Almost exactly 129 years after Napoleon launched his invasion of Russia, Hitler began his attack on Russia on June 22nd, 1941. Despite the revolutionary changes which had taken place in the interval, he was to provide a tragic demonstration of the truth that mankind, and least of all, its great men, do not learn from history. And he has great men in quotes. He's not calling Hitler a great man. He's... The basic flaw in dictatorship. It would be untruthful not to recognize that authoritarian regimes such as Napoleon's have produced some good fruits. They are found to be in both the material and spiritual fields. Many social norm reforms and practical improvements have been carried out within a few years, which in a democracy would have been debated for generations. Okay, so when you have a totalitarian system, you can make some things happen a little quicker. He gives them credit for that. It is also to the credit of the totalitarian system that they have simulated service to the community, or that they have stimulated service to the community and the sense of comradeship up to a point. So you get some nationalism going. Mm-hmm. It is man's power of thought which has generated the current of human progress throughout the ages. Thus, the thinking man must be against authoritarianism in any form because it shows its fear of thoughts which do not suit momentary authority. Any sincere writer must be against it because it believes in censorship. Any true historian must be against it because he can see that it leads to the repetition of old follies, as well as to the deliberate adulteration of history. Anyone who tries to solve problems scientifically must be against it, since it refuses to recognize that criticism is the lifeblood of science. In sum, any seeker of the truth must be against it because it subordinates truth to state expediency. This spells stagnation. Can't support the authoritarianism, man. Disturbing trends. One factor is an excessive growth. And he's talking about Britain and America and other democratic places. And this is 1944, by the way. One factor is an excessive growth of security-mindedness, the more bureaucratic than realistic, so it is more often carried to ludicrous extremes. It is certainly more difficult for Parliament or Congress to acquire the knowledge on which to base useful comment on defense matters. So this is when we start really tracking what people are doing to an excessive point. And he's talking about that in 1944. Mm-hmm. This is a really important lesson here on leadership and life and all aspects. The fallacy of compulsion. We learn from history that the compulsory principle always breaks down in practice. It is practicable to prevent men doing something. Moreover, that principle of restraint or regulation is essentially justifiable insofar as its application is needed to check interference with others' freedom. So it's one thing to stop you from doing something. Like it makes sense. It's justifiable because what you're doing might infringe on someone else's freedom. Mm. So for me to restrain you from doing something, there's going to be some of that. Mm. But it is not, in reality, possible to make men do something without risking more than is gained from the compelled effort. Mm. The method may appear practicable because it often works when applied to those who are merely hesitant. When applied to those who are definitely unwilling, it fails. However, because it generates friction and fosters subtle forms of evasion that spoil the effect which is sought. The test of whether a principle works is to be found in the product. So you can't make people do things. And look, if you're a little bit hesitant, I might be able to get away with it. But if you ain't down, it's going to be problematic. Yeah. And it's problematic because subtle forms of evasion, right? This is what we saw break down with communism when like the solidarity movement in Poland. They just would make little mistakes in the factory that would make the thing that they were building not work. Mm. And that just wrecks everything. Yeah. But that's how they were protesting. Yeah. And this happens, this happens with your freaking kids. Yes. Right? Yeah. You have to do this. It's going to take forever. It's going to be a problem. They're going to break the dish, whatever, that you're asking them to clean. Like, this is just so, it obviously happens with people that work for you. Mm-hmm. When you force something down their throat, they're not going to like it. Yeah. And they're going to do little things that are going to make it fail. Yeah. It doesn't work in the long run. It's not a strategic move. Compulsion. It's not a strategic move. It might work for a little while, but it's not a strategic move. Yeah. It's a short-term move. Listen to this. Efficiency springs from enthusiasm because this alone can develop a dynamic impulse. Enthusiasm is incompatible with compulsion because it essentially is spontaneous. So that's what makes the difference. Mm. For a group, for a team, is when you have this dynamic, spontaneous impulse to do the right thing. This is decentralized command. This is good culture. Yeah. When we don't have that, when I'm forcing you to do something, all of that disappears. And you have what I talked to a group the other day, and I talked about collective, I called it something, collective slacking. Yeah. Like, imagine you got your football team, official. Yeah. And everyone on the football team turns the dial down 4%. Yeah. What, can you get a touchdown? Like, you might get one. Yeah. But it's not a good approach. It's not a good approach. Yeah. And it's really imperceivable that Echo gave 4% less effort. Like, I can't really see that when I'm watching. Mm-hmm. And I can't really see that Fred he gave 5% less, and Mike, he gave 7% less, and you can't really see it with each individual person. Yeah. But when each individual person backs off the gas just a little bit, they lose that dynamic impulse. That's when you have failure.
Then you lose. Yeah.
Compulsion is thus bound to deaden enthusiasm because it dries up the source. The more an individual or nation has been accustomed to freedom, the more deadening will be the effect of change to compulsion. Then he talks about conscription here. Conscription does not fit the conditions of modern warfare. It is specialized technical equipment, mobile operations in fluid situations. Success increasingly depends on the individual initiative, which in turn springs from a sense of personal responsibility. This is ownership. When I give you ownership, do you do better or worse?
When you give me ownership, I do better.
When you give your kids ownership, do they do better or worse?
They do better, yes.
That's what this is talking about. These fluid situations. Success depends on individual initiative. And when you compel people to do things, when you force it down their throat, that disappears. That's why communism doesn't work, actually.
Yeah.
That's why dictatorial leaders end up failing, because they're like, you will deliver the numbers I'm telling. And that doesn't help, because that person's in the field like, I'm not delivering those numbers. I'm not working extra hard for Echo the way he treats me.
Yeah.
But if Echo's like, hey, we can win this together, and everything you bring in is gonna bring us closer to the overall number. This is the strategy we're going for, and here's how it's gonna benefit you. I'm like, yo, I'm gonna go out there and work extra hard.
Yeah. Yeah, that idea which I'm obviously familiar with, but I'm kind of going down a rabbit hole mentally about, is those silent protests.
Oh, yeah.
Or the secret protests, or what, those they're little small little things. I mean, that's the old school, like, you're a waiter or a fast food hamburger maker or whatever, and the customer is treating you like shit, and you're like, fine, you got to do it, you got to go make it, that's your job or whatever, but you're getting treated, and what does he do?
You ain't getting no ketchup.
He spits in the burger or something like that.
That's straight hostile.
Yeah, old school, yeah. I mean, I'm assuming that doesn't happen as often as maybe it might be purported. In the movies, they do that, which is fun. You ever see? What was it? I think it was like Goodfellas. It was Goodfellas. Yeah. Pretty sure it was Goodfellas. Where the cops, they're in on the take, and they're like, "Hey guys, how you doing?" All nice to the cops. Like, he goes in the back, gets them a sandwich, he spits on all of them. Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, that's kind of the kind of stuff you get, right? Stuff you'll never really know about. You'll feel the effects, and it'll suck, but you won't. You can't you can't follow the the effects down to, hey, it was because of this. It was just, but it's all going on behind your back, kind of
Echo
a thing.
he didn't do that thing quite right, and now the whole project's backed up, and now we got to get this other. It's like everything falls apart.
Or you don't even know Echo didn't do that quite right. Echo did it. It's just for some reason, like, things just don't seem to be working out as good as I hoped. Kind of a thing, and it's like that, like for good, just because of how you're running.
Collective slacking occurs, and then we're losing.
Little silent protest, collective slacking.
Continuing on, moreover, every unwilling man is a germ carrier, spreading infection to an extent altogether disproportionate to the value of service if he is forced to contribute. That is such an important little note. If I'm like, no, Echo, you're going to do it my way. Now go get with the team and do what I told you. You drag that negativity down there. And you're going to disproportionate the value that you bring. Because I was like, no, you need to get down there and move those rocks. And you get down there, this is bullshit. We shouldn't have to move these rocks. Even though you're going to move 7 rocks, the negativity that you brought to the whole team, they move 12 rocks less. Because you're down there complaining and bringing everyone down and saying this is stupid and why do we even have to move these things? So I forced you to do it, and it actually hurts the whole team. And we end up with a disproportionate negative compared to the value that you bring in your contribution, which is limited, by the way, because you don't even want to be there in the first place. You gotta watch out with that one. And he talks about, for my own part, I've come to my present conviction of the supreme importance of freedom through the pursuit of efficiency. I believe that freedom is the foundation of efficiency, both national and militarily. And I'll go ahead and tell you, this is the same as your family. It's the same as your business. If you're over there freaking beating people and compelling them and forcing them to do things, I know it's your kid. I know you know that your son should be doing this thing in order to have the best life, and your daughter needs to get on this path in order to be a better human being. I know you know that. I'm going to tell you, you force them to do it, and it's not going to be worth it.
No, it won't.
It's not going to be worth it. Progress by compulsion. At the same time, history warns us that even in the negative regulatory sense, if much more in the positive compulsory sense, the effort to achieve progress by decree is apt to lead to reaction. The more hurried the effort, the greater the risk to its endurance. The surer way of achieving progress is by generating and diffusing the thought of improvement. So when you force progress, it actually can lead to a negative reaction. We're going to make this change now because I said so. That's not going to, it's going to actually make people go against you. Reforms that last are those that come naturally and with less friction when men's mind have become ripe for them. A life spent in sowing a few grains of fruitful thought is a life spent more effectively than in hasty action that produces a crop of weeds. That leads us to see the difference, truly a vital difference between influence and power. So if you're leading by power, you're in a bad way. If you're leading by influence, you're in a good way. And if you're leading by power, ultimately, it's less efficient. This is what's so hard for people to understand. It's less efficient to go in there and bark orders and impose your plan on everybody. That's less efficient than going in, listening, and being collaborative, being open-minded with your team. It's less efficient. Even though I know it's hard to understand that, it's true. That's the indirect approach. This last section is called War and Peace. The desire for power. History shows that a main hindrance to real progress is the ever-popular myth of the great man, once again in quotes. While greatness may perhaps be used in a comparative sense, if even then referring more to the particular qualities of than to the embodied sum, the quote, great man is a clay idol whose pedestal has been built up by the natural human desire to look up to someone, but whose form has been carved by men who have not yet outgrown the desire to be regarded or to picture themselves as great men. Many of those who gain power under present systems have much that is good in them, but few are without some good in them. But to keep their power, it is easier and seems safer to appeal to the lowest common denominator of the people, to instinct rather than to reason, to interest rather than to right, to expediency rather than to principle. So you can be a good person, but you get into power, and it's like the easiest thing to do is just let's go lowest common denominator with the people. Let's get people emotional rather than reasonable. Let's protect our own interest rather than protect what is right. This is the problem with politics at large. The short-sightedness of expediency. We learn from history that expediency has rarely proved expedient. This is the indirect approach. Expediency, trying to get things done fast, is usually less efficient and less effective.
Also known as trying to force it.
Yeah, trying to force it. It's not good. Yet today, perhaps more than ever, the statesmen of all countries talk the language of expediency almost as if they are afraid to label themselves unpractical by referring to principles. So when you start talking about, as if you're a politician, and you start talking about the broader picture and how we can move to a better place, as opposed to just saying, here's the solution to this. Like, we have the most complex problems, and people try and throw a bumper sticker solution on it. And if you try and be more nuanced about it, then you get attacked as being inefficient and stupid. He says here, the strength of British policy has been its adaptability to circumstances as they arise. Its weakness, that the circumstances, which are usually difficulties, could have been forestalled through forethought. So we're good at dealing with problems, but we don't see the problems coming. The importance of keeping promises. Civilization is built on the practice of keeping promises. It may not sound a high attainment, but if trust in its observance be shaken, the whole structure cracks and sinks. Any constructive effort and all human relations, personal, political, and commercial, depend on being able to depend on promises. And then he goes on to talk about the importance of care about making promises. It is immoral to make promises that one cannot in practice fulfill in the sense that the recipient expects. So be careful about making promises. And then he's got this cool section in here called the Germs of War. And the Germs of War, you're going to see this is not just about war. The cause of most troubles can be traced to excess. The failure to check them to deficiency, their prevention lies in moderation. So be balanced. Don't get crazy. If you're getting crazy, we're going to have problems. Here's some of the germs: sweeping judgments, malicious gossip, inaccurate statements which spread a misleading impression. These are the symptoms of the moral and mental recklessness that gives rise to war. And by the way, it also gives rise to the little political drama that you got going on in your company.
Especially sweeping judgments.
Oh, those are bad.
Would you say that's the most prominent of those?
I'm not going to force rank these things.
Yeah.
Because they're all going to be bad, and they all work amongst each other too.
Yeah, it feels like the sweeping judgments thing is like, it's almost like that's what we're trying to do. It's almost like it may have come from like a maybe lazy-mindedness approach of things, you know?
You know what? The one of the problems I have with that, or one of the additive statements I would make, is it's saying sweeping judgments, and that's, you get this idea of this being this really big, broad thing. Yeah. But I think you have just as much difficulties arise from little tiny judgments, little tiny inaccurate judgments. Like you come in to tell me something, or Echo doesn't know what he's talking about. Like, or he's doing this because he's got his own agenda. Like there's these little tiny judgments that we make that are usually made by our ego, by our emotions. And so we make these little tiny judgments. They're not sweeping. Yeah. I'm just saying like, oh, Echo's got a stupid plan. And so I don't put full effort into it. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But yes, judgment in general, sweeping or small, causes problems.
Yeah. Like, you know how the president running, or the guy running for president, whoever, he says one thing you disagree with, you just judge the whole deal. This guy's not for me, one thing.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing that you can take any topic and then you can formulate your entire belief system around one topic. Yeah. And when you tell me that your beliefs on one singular topic, then yes, I make a sweeping judgment about everything that you believe. And by the way, in this day and age, there's a decent chance that you're just on board with that because you're like, I'm on this side. Yeah. I'm on the red team. I'm on the blue team. I'm on the yellow team. I'm on the black team. It's like, oh, so then I know everything that you believe. When the reality is, I would hope people have much more nuanced understandings and beliefs about, well, I grew up in the city, so I think this. Well, I grew up in the country, and I think that. But I see where you're coming from over here, and this kind of makes sense to me.
Yeah. It can get so bad. I've heard people actually say this in real life, not just on the internet, where they'll refer to someone that they don't know as a XYZ supporter, some candidate supporter, therefore that's a bad person. Just because they support this, they don't know why they support them. They don't know under what, they don't know who else they support. They don't know. They just, that's a XYZ supporter. Freaking, that's how you know, kind of a thing. Sweeping judgments.
Sweeping judgments are bad. Back to the book. Studying their effect, one is led to see that the germs of war lie within ourselves. Not in economics, politics, or religion as such. How can we hope to rid the world of war until we have cured ourselves of the originating causes? So to your point, like the problems that we have, the reason I'm mad at you isn't because you support this candidate or that candidate. It's actually an issue that I have. How the germs work. These germs are most virulent among those who direct the affairs of nations. The atmosphere of power and the activity in the pursuit of power inflame them. So, hey, everyone's got some of these things, but the higher you go in rank, man, the more they get, the more they come out. The way they can be worked clearly traced in examining the origins and course of World War I. While economic factors formed a predisposing cause, the deeper and more decisive factors lay in human nature. Its possessiveness, competitiveness, vanity, and pugnacity, all of which were fomented by the dishonesty which breeds inaccuracy. That's why we got World War I, millions of people dead, because of our own human nature, our own competitiveness, our own vanity. Fast forward a little bit. The war we were drawn stumbling into was, on our side, a striking example of the drawbacks of entering into vague commitments without thinking out the implications and military problems. How the germs persist. Similar influences wrecked every good chance of bringing the war to an end on satisfactory terms before all the countries were exhausted. When one gets a close view of influential people, their bad relations with each other, their conflicting ambitions, all the slander and the hatred, one must bear in mind that it is certainly much worse on the other side. Among the French, English, and Russians, or one might well be nervous, the race for power and personal positions seems to destroy all men's characters. Any history of war which treats only of its strategic and political course is merely a picture of the surface. The personal currents run deeper and may have a deeper influence on the outcome. We learn from history that war breeds war. That is natural. The illusion of victory. It's what sucks about this is like all these little petty things that I talk about a lot with ego and with arrogance and with agendas and alignment, like all these things that we'll talk to a business and be like, oh yeah, we're going to miss revenue this quarter because we got some egos involved. And you think, wow, that's terrible. Or like, oh, we actually had to fire this guy because, his ego got out of control. He got fired because of it. And it seems real bad, right? Or like, hey, you're not getting promoted because you're over here looking out for yourself, and that's why you didn't get promoted, because everyone saw through where they saw your real self, and that's why you got to focus on the team more. Like we give this very pertinent, very powerful advice. And sure, those lessons are rooted in war, but when you start talking about world wars and millions of people dying because an ego here, a power trip there, a vanity over here. Like that's just sickening. It's sickening. The illusion of victory. We learn from history that complete victory has never been completed by the result that the victors always anticipate, a good and lasting peace. So you want a good and lasting peace, you're never going to get it. For victory has always sown the seeds of a fresh war, because victory breeds among the vanquished a desire for vindication and vengeance, and because victory raises fresh rivals. A too complete victory inevitably complicates the problem of making a just and wise peace settlement. The only thing I'd say about that is I think we did pretty good with Germany and Japan. Unconditional surrender. And look at Germany and Japan now. They're our allies. They're, good societies moving forward. It is an elementary principle of strategy that if you find your opponent in a strong position costly to force, you should leave him a line of retreat as the quickest way of loosening his resistance. It should equally be a principle of policy, especially in war, to provide your opponent with a ladder by which he can climb down. Always give somebody a way out. That's so important in a meeting.
Yeah.
Where you've got some plan and your plan doesn't really make sense. And instead of confronting you in front of everyone and making you look bad, I'm going to say, hey, actually, there's some things that I didn't bring to light. It's my fault. Can I talk to you after about this? Because I think I might have done a bad job, and I think we might need to reassess this. Give you a little way out.
Yeah.
No big deal.
Yeah. It's a good one.
The importance of moderation. We learn from history that after any long war, the survivors are apt to reach common agreement that there has been no real victory, but only common losers. War is only profitable if victory is quickly gained. Only an aggressor can hope to gain a quick victory. If he is frustrated, the war is bound to be long and mutually ruinous, unless it is brought to an end by mutual agreement. Since an aggressor goes to war for gain, he is apt to be the more ready of the two sides to seek peace by agreement. The aggressed side is usually more inclined to seek vengeance through the pursuit of victory, even though all experience has shown that victory is a mirage in the desert created by a long war. The will to fight always tends to become stronger among the people who have been attacked, so that it is easier to make them hold out in any negotiation for terms that are satisfying. The history of ancient Greece showed that in a democracy, emotion dominates reason to a greater extent than in any other political system, thus giving freer rein to the passions which sweep a state into war and prevent it getting out at any point short of the exhaustion and destruction of one or the other of the opposing sides. So that's interesting. The democracy, we get hyper emotional. And this goes on and says democracy is a system which puts a brake on preparation for war, aggressive or defensive, but it is not one that conduces to the limitation of warfare or the prospects of a good peace. No political system more easily becomes out of control when passions are aroused. These defects have been multiplied in modern democracies since their great extension of size and their vast electorate produce a much larger volume of emotional pressure. Now let's just throw social media into the mix on that and 24-hour news cycles.
Yep. Well, why is that? I mean, obviously, aside from that, can be almost simplified. I don't know. I could be wrong, so I'm just thinking out loud here for your benefit, for your entertainment.
Detriment.
But it comes down to choice, right? When you have free democracy, that means, hey, you're free to make any decision. You have a lot of choices, essentially. But when you don't have a choice, you know how, like, I don't know, if we go somewhere to eat, you only got 2 choices. You'd be like, all right, I choose that one. But what if you have infinite choices? Or, you know, whatever, 100 choices. And then you got 100 people. Bruh, there's going to be so many choices, and you're going to be like, no. That means if you get it, then I don't get it, even though I could get it under the system. I could get it. I should get it, right? It's free. I'm free. I'm free to, why am I, bending to your choice? I want my choice. The more choices there are, the more that's going to go on. And the more fired up we get. See what I'm saying? But if we know just off the freaking starting block, hey, there's only one choice, actually. Let's go with one choice. There's only one choice. No matter if you like it or not, but it's like, oh, we already accepted that early on, so we're not going to get all fired up about going to that one choice, So as far as like how to run your life or how to live your life or whatever, you don't have as much choice if you're not under a democracy.
Yeah, although you do get that kind of unified emotion inside of a tyrannical nation where it certainly appears from the outside, like you hear those stories about when Hitler was giving a speech. No one would want to stop clapping because then they become the first person that stopped clapping. It's like, so you're not a true supporter. Yeah. And so they'd sit there and clap for so long and standing ovations would last forever because no one wanted to freaking stop clapping and sit down. Yeah. So you get, sometimes you see some of that, where people are just going freaking crazy emotional.
That's crazy.
And he talks about Wellington here. He says, it was because he really understood war that he became so good at securing peace. He was the least militaristic of soldiers and free from the lust of glory. It was because he saw the value of peace that he became so unbeatable in war. For he kept the end in view instead of falling in love with the means. Unlike Napoleon, he was not infected by the romance of war, which generates illusions of self-deceptions. That was how Napoleon had failed and Wellington prevailed. There's a section in here about the illusion of treaties, and this is one of the clear lessons that history teaches is that no agreement between governments has had any stability beyond their recognition that it is in their own interest to continue to adhere to it. So like, I'll stick with the rules. I'll stick with the treaty as long as it's good for me. And if it's not good for me, eventually I'm going to fight.
Yeah.
The Romans coined the maxim, if you wish for peace, prepare for war. But Calvin Coolidge caustically remarked after World War I, no nation ever had an army large enough to guarantee it against attack in time of peace or ensure it victory in time of war. So it doesn't matter how much you prepare. You Can't be ready enough to ensure victory.
Yeah.
In studying how wars have broken out, I was led to suggest after World War I that a truer maxim would be, if you wish for peace, understand war. Have to agree with that one. There is no panacea for peace that can be written out in a formula like a doctor's prescription, but one can set down a series of practical points, elementary principles drawn from the sum of human experience in all times. Study war and learn from its history. Keep strong if possible. In any case, keep cool. Have unlimited patience. Never corner an opponent and always assist him to save his face. Put yourself in his shoes so as to see things through his eyes. Avoid self-righteousness like the devil. Nothing is so self-blinding. Cure yourself of two commonly fatal delusions, the idea of victory and the idea that war cannot be limited. So that's just a whole slew of good advice for life, right? Yeah. Keep cool in any case. Have unlimited patience. Don't corner people. See the other person's perspectives and don't be self-righteous.
Because it can be blinding.
Blinding.
Most blinding. Yeah.
This is the dilemma of the intellectual. Neither intellectuals nor their critics appear to recognize the inherent dilemma of the thinking man and its inevitability. The dilemma should be faced, for it is a natural part of the growth of any human mind. An intellectual ought to realize the extent to which the world is shaped by human emotions uncontrolled by reason. His thinking must have been shallow and his observation narrow if he fails to realize that. So you want to be all smart? Want to be all intellectual? You want to talk about reason? Cool. But you better realize that what's driving humans is their emotions. Yeah. Having once learned to think and to use reason as a guide, however, he cannot possibly float with the current of popular emotion and fluctuate with its violent changes unless he himself ceases to think or is deliberately false to his own thought. George Orwell expressed in a profound truth that, quote, the energy that actually shapes the world springs from emotions, end quote. And I would put a little additive on that. Your emotions, especially the negative ones, come from your ego. Fast forward a little bit. History bears witness to the vital part that the prophets have played in human progress, quotes prophets, which is evidence of the ultimate practical value of expressing unreservedly the truth as one sees it. And this is something that we talked about when we did the first series of podcasts on him. He's got this idea between that there's people that are prophets, and these are people that bring out the truth when the truth is not accepted. Yet it also becomes clear that the acceptance and spreading of their vision has always depended on another class of men, leaders. So you have the prophet and then you have the leaders who had to be philosophical strategists striking a compromise between truth and men's receptivity to it. So the prophet's just out there saying, like, this is the truth. Yeah. The leaders say, hey, listen, we need to make some adjustments here. Here's another way of looking at things.
Yeah. Kind of the liaison, if you will.
Yeah, like a liaison. Their effect has often depended as much on their own limitations in perceiving the truth as on their practical wisdom in proclaiming it. The prophets must be stoned. That is their lot in life and a test of their self-fulfillment. So if you're putting out the word and people don't want to hear that word, you're getting stoned. A leader who is stoned, however, may merely prove that he has failed in his function through a deficiency of wisdom or through confusing his function with that as a prophet.
In that last book, that's what he says too, right? The prophets must be bright. I never forgot that. It's interesting.
Yep. You can look out at the world and you can see the people that put out opposing truth that's opposing the common narrative. Yeah. And they're getting crushed. Yeah. They're getting stoned.
Getting attacked, that's for sure.
They're getting attacked, that's for damn sure. Opposition to the truth is inevitable, especially if it takes on the form of a new idea, but the degree of resistance can be diminished by giving thought not only to the aim, but the method of approach. Now we're talking about the indirect approach. Avoid a frontal attack on long-established position. Instead, seek to turn it by a flank movement so that the more penetrable side is exposed to the thrust of truth. But in any such indirect approach, take care not to diverge from the truth, for nothing is more fatal to its real advancement than to lapse into untruth. And there's actually a great example in here. So when the tanks came out, there's people that didn't like the tanks. It's going to get bogged down. There's all these needs fuel. Like, what are you, crazy? How are we going to refuel these things? And the people, the leaders that actually brought the tanks into fruition to be utilized on a larger scale militarily, it says here, a notable example was the way that the opposition to mechanization, that's the beginning of use of tanks, was diminished by showing that the mobile armored vehicle, the fast-moving tank, was fundamentally the heir of the armored horseman, and thus the natural means of reviving the decisive role which cavalry had played in past ages. So, like, remember all those guys that were riding around on horses? Yeah. They're like, hey, this is like the new horse. Yeah. This tank is the new, and people are like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool, right? Yeah. It's a way to flank them and not just freaking tanks are better than horses, tanks are better than infantry, tanks are the new way. No, it's like tanks are the new horse. So what you've been doing been good. Yeah. We appreciate it. Yeah. You're kind of like the natural progression. Yeah. Thank you. Fire up those tanks.
What kind of fuel do tanks have?
Diesel. Yep.
Straight up diesel.
Yep.
Gas tank, like a diesel truck tank. Just fuel it up at the station.
Yep.
Get it rolling.
Fuel it up at the station. And I think it has a little bit broader, like, there's probably you can probably use a little bit less processed fuel, but I don't know. I'm not a tanker. We should have asked the general.
Sure.
The limitations of conformity. Even among great scholars, there is no more unhistorical fallacy that in order to command, you must learn to obey. Now, this is something we wrote about. We wrote about this. Leif and I wrote about this. If you want to lead, you got to learn to follow first. He's saying that's not true. Okay. A more temperamentally insubordinate lot than the outstanding soldiers and sailors of the past could scarcely be found in England as one only has to think of Wolfe, Wellington, Nelson, and Dundonald. So he's saying, like, look, all these guys were rebels. So he's saying, look, it's an extreme, it's not a perfect counter to what we wrote.
Sure.
What he's saying is more in line with the psychology of military incompetence, which is if you obey orders and you're just an obedient person, you're probably not going to be a real winner out there on the battlefield.
Got it. Yeah. Is that kind of like some people at work, they're kind of innovative. Yep. They're kind of like, they like to think of new directions and stuff. And then some people, they just, hey, tell me where and when to get there. Tell me what I'm doing, and they'll just go, you know? Yep. And that's like two very specific types of person. Mm-hmm. Is that kind of what he's talking about in a way? I mean, or that dynamic anyway? And
what he's saying is that in order to be a leader, you can't be one of those person that's just totally obedient all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you got to be that kind of person.
Right. Like Dean Lister. Yeah. Now, if all he did was like do exactly what his jiu-jitsu professors told him, would he have become the Dean Lister that we know today? The answer is no. Yeah. He had to have some rebellious part of him that was sort of like, does this work? I'm going to try something else. Yeah. I'm going to try something outside the box. Yeah. In order to win in chaotic environments, you've got to be more open-minded. You can't just be obedient. Right. And he says, a model boy rarely goes far, and even when he does, he is apt to falter when severely tested. A boy who conforms immaculately to school rules is not likely to grow into a man who will conquer by breaking the stereotyped professional rules of his time, as conquest has most often been achieved. He can't just be my opinion of like the best is you got someone that knows when to conform, knows when to follow the rules, but then also is constantly thinking like, what can I do different? How can I break outside the box? What if I get attacked from this direction? I'm gonna do something that no one expected me to do.
Yeah.
Like, it was wild listening to the general talk about bombing ISIS's money supplies, like $1 billion, and actually pulling the assets off of searching for high value targets. So General McFarland's like, oh, I'm actually not going to let you do that right now, or I'm not going to give you the support that you need, because we're gonna blow up their money supply. Some of those money supplies, $1 billion, and how that truly crippled the enemy, crippled ISIS. That's kind of outside the box, somewhat rebellious thinking.
Yeah.
And also, at the beginning of the fight against ISIS, he talked about the ROEs were too constrictive, and he's like, no, I can't follow these ROEs. I can't do this. We need some flexibility. He didn't just break the rules, but he said, oh, I need to change these. And they changed them.
Right.
The problem of force. The more I've reflected on the experience of history, the more I've come to see the instability of solutions achieved by force, and to suspect even those instances where force has led to the appearance of resolving difficulties. This is so important to remember as a parent. But as a leader, as a person, if you force your solution on people, it's not going to be a lasting solution. It's not going to happen. It just creates instability. It creates a surface level of compliance, but it's not deeply rooted, and it's going to crack. There is at least one solution that is yet to be tried, that the masters of force should be those who have mastered all desire to employ it. This is similar to what Jordan Peterson was talking about on this podcast a few years ago, when he said, like, you should be dangerous, but you should have the discipline to control it. If armed forces were controlled by men who have become convinced of the wrongness of using force, there would be the nearest approach to a safe assurance against its abuse. The problem of limiting war. Can war be limited? Logic says no. War is the sphere of violence, and it would be illogical to hesitate in using any extreme of violence that can help you win the war. History applies. Such logic makes nonsense. You go to war to win the peace, not just for the sake of fighting. Extremes of violence may frustrate your purpose, so that victory becomes a boomerang. Moreover, it is a matter of historical fact that war has always been limited in many ways. He talks about a little bit about Caesar, Hitler, and he says the Romans at their worst were mild compared with our own ancestors and the ancestors of all Western European nations during the Dark Ages that followed the collapse of the Roman Empire. It was the habit of the Saxons and the Franks to slay everyone in their path, men, women, and children, and to indulge in the most reckless destruction of towns and crops. And then he goes on to say, yet the savagery of such warfare was not so great as it had been in the Dark Ages. Moreover, this excess of violence produced a widespread revulsion, which in turn led to a great advance, greater than ever before. To proceed to extremes in war might be logical, but it was not reasonable. Another important influence was the growth of more formal and courteous manners in social life. This code of manners spread into the field of international relations. These two factors, reason and manners, saved civilization when it was on the verge of collapse. Men came to feel that behavior mattered more than belief, and customs more than creed, in making earthly life tolerable and human relations workable. So when we started to actually behave, it helped all of society.
Like gentlemen.
Yes, like gentlemen. And it literally talks about the code, the code of chivalry and this kind of thing. Fast forward a little bit. To take the opinion of generals, admirals, or air marshals on the deeper problems of war as distinct from its executive technique is like consulting your local pharmacist about the treatment of a deep-seated disease. However skilled in compounding drugs, it is not their concern to study the causes and consequences of the disease, nor the psychology of the sufferers. He's basically saying, like, you can't just listen to generals you want to talk about war. The problem of irregular warfare. The prospects for disarmament or formal restrictions on war have become increasingly complicated by the development of irregular warfare in different forms throughout the world. Guerrilla fighting, subversion, and resistance. He really saw this coming. This is in 1944 he wrote this. This is before Vietnam. This is before Afghanistan and Iraq and those big insurgencies in Algeria. Like this is, he's got a lot of foresight here. The habit of violence takes much deeper root in irregular warfare than it does in regular warfare. In the latter, it is counteracted by the habit of obedience to constituted authority, whereas in the former makes it a virtue of defying authority and violating rules. It becomes very difficult to rebuild a country and a stable state on such an undetermined or undermined foundation. So when you're dealing with an insurgency that are rebelling and acting violently and they're being rewarded for that, it's difficult to reestablish them in some kind of a more normal society. The problem of a world order. Regrettable as it might seem to the idealist, the experience of history provides little warrant for the belief that real progress and the freedom that makes progress possible lies in unification. I was kind of surprised to hear this. So, hey, you don't get real freedom from everyone being together, unified. For where unification has been able to establish unity of ideas, it has usually ended in uniformity, paralyzing the growth of new ideas. And where the unification has merely brought about an artificial or imposed unity, its irksomeness has led through the discord and disruption. So we think we're doing it when we get everyone in line.
Right.
And it seems to work for a little while, but that's not ultimately what's going to make things work well.
So, actually funny, because EK, you know who Bill Maher is, right?
Yes.
So he said something where I was like, I don't think I agree. Which now, hearing that, I think I do agree. And it was kind of a joke, but, with a lot of his jokes, there's a lot of seriousness in it. Where he was like, hey, we shouldn't like be fighting each other. We should learn to get along with the people that we hate. Essentially, he said it in a funny, jokey way, but basically, and I'm like, bro, why you gotta hate everybody? Like, why can't we just get along? Kind of a thing. That's what I'm thinking in my head. Real simple. And he's basically saying like, it's okay that you dislike someone, but we gotta learn to live together, even if we dislike each other. I was like, that makes sense. Now that you say that, it's kind of like, yeah, that's true, huh? We don't all have to freaking be unified and think the same thing and feel the same way about every different thing, bro. Everyone's freaking, be mad at that guy or whatever, but still, like the idea of kind of accepting that this is what we're doing, you can say, there's like a classic thing that everyone always says, that like,
agree to disagree.
Agree to disagree is a good one, yeah, but it's way more eloquent. It's I don't agree with what you're saying, but I'll fight to the death for your right to say it. Yeah. It's kind of like that idea, right? Where it's like, I don't like it, I don't agree or whatever, but hey, man, you can be here just like me, and freaking, it's all good. We keep pushing,
Well, I'm happy that you have that thought because a lot of people don't. Yeah. Bro, you go on social media, people, they sound insane. Like if you were to take the words that they write in a comment about some politician or some other politician, and you were to have a person say that, you'd be like, oh, this person's unhinged. Like they're not thinking clearly.
You know what I think, though? I mean, not to go off on too much of a social media tangent. I think there's kind of probably more than two, but two things are going on that kind of give rise to that, which I agree. That's how it feels to me too. But first off, I think it's only a small group of people who are on there acting up, being weird, like being non-normal. That's A. And it's even actually a smaller group than we think, because there's a big group of people, of the small group of people, that are like, under normal circumstances, they wouldn't do all that stuff. If they were in a scenario where all the information was presented to them in a calm, non-combative, non-emotionally driven, or inducing way, they'd be like, that makes sense. That makes a little less sense to me. That, I don't know. They would probably act pretty normal. But social media has a way, on purpose, by the way, to get everybody freaking fired up, and not everybody's ready for that, So they encounter it, and they can't, quote unquote, can't help but get fired up and then act up. See what I'm saying? And I think that's like a good amount of people. That's what I think.
Okay. I'm going to, you have to excuse my language I'm about to use here.
Sure.
When's the last time that you heard another person tell to their face, fuck you?
Well, I see what you're saying.
No, I'm asking, like, for real. When's the last time you saw another person?
Yeah. Well,
look at that person and say "fuck you"?
Yeah. Well, I tell my brother that all the time, but
no, not.
Yeah,
not
like
hey, no, not like "fuck you," man. Not like that. Right. I'm talking "fuck you."
Yeah, I don't know.
It's been a while, right?
It's been a while. Yeah, sir.
Do you ever go on Twitter or what is now known as X?
I don't go on X. No. I mean, I would, but it's not as entertaining.
Like, it's a good source for news, but when you see the news story, you're going to see, you go, okay, well, what? How are people reacting to this?
Yeah, and
you'll see, if you wanted to see the number of people that tell other people on this medium, blah blah blah, fuck you, and you're like, bro, are you okay?
Right.
So it's weird that that's what that's the way that medium. Like I said, if you took those words that people write in a tweet and you actually had a human being say those to another human being, like most people wouldn't do that.
Right.
Because you would sound completely unhinged. You wouldn't sound like you were, like, I would almost take that statement if you said something, no way should we ever do this as a country. This is bullshit. Fuck you. I'd be like, I'm not listening to what you're, you know what I mean?
Sounds like
I'm not like, oh, okay, well, let's say, hey, thanks for your opinion. No, I'm like, okay, this dude's a little unhinged.
Yes.
But that's kind of what, and again, even if you're just going on to Twitter because you want to check the news stories or check the trending news stories, because it's a good way to figure out what's happening. You record a podcast for 3 hours and you get done. You're like, oh, I wonder if there's anything happening in the world.
Sure.
A major event, an earthquake, a civilian plane crashes, a military attack happened, a terrorist attack. Like, okay, I'm going to check the trending news. Yeah. And so you open up a story and it says there's a earthquake, a level 7, what is it, 7.2 earthquake. Oh, wow. And then someone will chime in, with, of course we can't get them help because our president sucks. Yeah. Fuck you. And you're like, what are you talking about? What is wrong? And there's also like, the dramatics of it, the dramatics of the whole thing.
Yeah. So,
which is weird.
I agree with you about that. And that's kind of part of what I'm saying. And I'm sure, let's say that me and you are disagreeing, which I don't think we're disagreeing. But let's say we were. I'm sure it's somewhere in the middle. But this is what I'm saying.
Fuck
you. I'm saying that, people act up like that. But the majority of them, is my hypothesis, the majority of them fall into one of these groups. The majority of them. There's a minority of people, they're just unhinged now, and maybe social media just brought it out or whatever, and they're just weird. They're unhinged, like they probably see their neighbor like doing or mowing their lawn too early in the morning, and they roll over there and yell at them. And they're that kind of person. And there's people like that. Oh yeah, for sure, bro. The disgruntled neighbor. That's how, that's a disgruntled person, and sure, they're on social media for sure. But I think most of us are there either not ready for the algorithm in the freaking emotionally enticing stuff, and we're not ready for that, and consider over the idea of overtime as well, because it's not like just all of a sudden I'm a normal person and then boom, I'm psycho. It's like, first off, it's like, wait, is this real? What is it? And then it's like day by day by day over the years. Then now they're just normally psycho in that way because the algorithm made them that way. Yeah. And this is a very anomalous circumstance, because just like I said, in real life, no, they wouldn't do that because they don't get enticed like that in real life. That's why. So anyone who's enticed enough emotionally, they will say fuck you. They totally will in real life. But social media, sure, it's not real life, but it provides that same enticement under those circumstances.
Let me ask you this. Like, what makes me concerned for them is are they emotionally feeling? Like, when you type the words fuck you, does it feel the same way? Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of, so that means that a person, like, there's very few things that happen to me on a daily basis that get my emotions to a point where I even would think like, oh, the hell with this. Or like I don't know what, like, fuck you is kind of like the top hierarchy of anger expression at another human being.
Sure.
There's a whole bunch of levels down to, like, just
whatever. Roll your eyes.
Yeah, roll your eyes. Okay. So I barely even would roll my eyes at someone or like go like that. Like, it's not happening. So that means these people that are in that zone just on there. It's kind of crazy, right?
It is, but I do still think, and I don't know, bro. Who do I hang out with? I can't hang out with you most of the time.
And quite frankly, most of the time I go, oh, that's a weird bot.
Yeah.
I kind of attribute a lot of this stuff to just being bots or shit posters that are just, they get some kind of satisfaction about getting a response, like, oh, fuck you, no, fuck you. And that we have, like...
That's what I think, too. But actually, here, more than that, I would say the majority of human beings on Earth, kind of a thing, they're not on social media getting nuts all the time. I'd say we see the ones that do get nuts all the time. Yeah. That's who we see. So we're like, what's up with people of the world? Because you don't see all those other people ever in your life, ever, real life or otherwise. You don't see them because they're gone. They don't register on your little on your measurable or your measurement tool, whatever. So now who do you see? Okay, with those people who are the minority people in the world.
Mr. FU.
Yeah, you got Mr. FU. And then within that group of Mr. FUs, like, under what circumstances did they get to be that way? Mm-hmm. Some people, that's how. And they're crazy, and they're the people that you refer to as, like, people are crazy nowadays, right? That's them. Okay, they're small. Yeah. The rest are like, they act crazy on social media only because freaking social media makes them act crazy. They're not, they don't know how to deal with the algorithm like you or like a lot of people. Seriously, a lot of people do not know how to deal with it.
And a lot of people do.
Exactly.
You're actually making a point to me, which I agree with, and which I've made to a bunch. I've been interviewed a bunch of times where people have said, like, dude, you think America's so divisive? And I always say, like, it's super divisive on Twitter.
Yeah, online.
But I work with companies all over the country, and I travel all over the place, and everyone is trying to do better in their life, trying to get stronger, trying to improve their next quarter profitability and hire a new team and develop a new product. That's what most people are doing.
Yeah.
They're not sitting on social media freaking getting crazy. So your point is correct.
And even on top of that, where it's like, hey, if you really want to drill down or whatever, it's divisive only in certain places on social media. It's divisive in divisive places in social media. Like how you talked about, like, to Ben Shapiro and Candace Owens or whatever. It's like, their view of it, because they exist in the hot spots. Yeah. There's probably going my wife's social media. There's no divisiveness there. There's just some kids running around, and there's this and that. Go on my freaking brothers. Go on, like, pretty much everyone that you know, aside from a small handful of people. Go on their social media. See how many arguments are breaking out. Freaking none. That's and if they are, it's about, like, I don't know, something else. Like, it's not dividing the country. Yeah. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Well, to your point, this idea of unity that we all have to think the same way, it shouldn't be something that we strive for. We should actually just be striving for being more understanding and being more open-minded. Yeah. So that's a good point. That Bill Maher made?
Bill Maher.
Yeah.
But yeah. So that, I mean, again, I totally deviated, went into social media. Like, hey, let's look
at I think I dragged us over there. Okay. Social media.
But hey, that's enlightening to me too. Like, hey, you don't gotta agree. You don't have to even accept, really, but you got to learn to live together.
Yeah, and it always is good. And he already talked about this in the book. He's like, what's your perspective? Because if you hate Trump or you hate Biden, I should be like, oh, I wonder why you hate them.
Right.
Not like, well, then I hate you. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
This gets into the problem of world faith and how that interrupts. And he says this very interesting and very, interesting is not the right word. No, I'll just read it. I will state very simply how I came to find evidence of God that was convincing to reason. It was that an underworldly current of goodness has been maintained. So an underworldly current of goodness has been maintained and proved insuppressible in a world where evil flourishes and selfishness has obvious advantages. By human standards, there is no sense in self-sacrifice and helping others at one's own expense, yet that unselfish motive has been manifested in innumerable cases. Can it be explained save by the presence of a higher source of inspiration? This is something very similar that I say about war, and I say in war you see like the best part of humanity and you see the worst part of humanity, and that's what he's saying here. Like, why would people do things that benefit others when there's no benefit to yourself? Like, it doesn't make any sense. The only way to do that, the only way that people would make those decisions is a presence of some kind of higher power. He says, our civilization in the West has been rescued by the revival of a code that was based on moral values. The cult of chivalry did quite as much as the efforts of the church to bring Europe out of the Dark Ages. And this is going back to a topic that we already kind of touched on. Manners are apt to be regarded as surface polish. That is a superficial view. So again, just how you're behaving and having manners. They arise from an inward control. A fresh realization of their importance is needed in the world today, and the revival might prove the salvation of civilization. It's a bold statement. But dang, being polite, being well-mannered, that shows that you have self-control. Yeah. And we need self-control, because what is that doing? That's controlling your emotions. So when someone cuts you in the line at the grocery market and your response is, fuck you, instead of, excuse me, sorry, yeah, go ahead. That you take that. It's just like I was talking about these principles of leadership and how, hey, this guy got fired because he had a bad ego. Whereas in war, it's like, oh, that guy got 20 million people killed because he had a big ego. So now you take good manners and good behavior and you start to amplify that on a global level. You can see where this is important.
Yeah. I oftentimes think of manners as like also the quelling of impulse, where like
100%.
Like the more freaking rowdy you are, the more like you can't control your impulses, right? And manners, what do you think of when you think manners? You think this proper gentleman, who like under, something might maybe frustrate him, but he'll behave, accordingly and not give in to the impulse to lose his temper or treat someone, a certain way. Or even like this idea of toxic masculinity or whatever. So, like let's say someone who's insensitive and has bad manners towards women, right? Big, strong guy or whatever. Like, how's he going to make them feel like, and sometimes that's an impulsive thing, but regardless of like how you might feel somewhere in your mind or whatever, you can control it. So it's like, that the controlling of impulse as well.
Yeah. And then you multiply that times like a government.
Yeah.
A society.
Yeah, that's true.
And it says, for only manners in the deeper sense of mutual restraint for mutual security can control the risk that outbursts of temper over political and social issues may lead to the mutual destruction in the atomic age. Yeah, bad manners. Confucianism was humanly wiser than Christianity in that it recognized and applied better than Christianity the truth of experiences that was epitomized in Aristotle's observation that, quote, men acquire a peculiar quality by constantly acting in a particular way. Men acquire a particular quality by constantly acting in a particular way. And that reminded me of what RFK, his whole story of spiritual enlightenment. He says, I said, well, how did you quit drugs? He said, I have a spiritual enlightenment. And I was like, well, what was that all about? And then he kind of told that story. And one of the key components of that story that he told was he told that whole story about how they were looking for proof of God and they couldn't find proof of God. But what they did find was that the people that believed in God had better lives than the people that didn't. And so what he started doing was acting as if God existed and acted as if he believed in God. Yeah. And guess what? His life got better. And so that's what this is, this comment from Aristotle. If you act in a particular way, you will gain that particular quality. So how our actions are going to impact who we are and what we are. And that goes back to the whole thing about like, can you be brave? If you're scared, can you be brave? Well, did you do the thing? Then you were brave. Yeah. So we need to act and behave better. That's what this whole section is about. Manners. Like, it doesn't matter if I'm mad at you. I have to act as if I'm not. And some people say, like, well, you got to be your true self. No, actually don't. And if you don't be your true self, if you don't act out in these ways and you actually act like a civilized good human being, over time you'll become a good civilized human being.
Yeah.
The point here is that if you you will acquire a particular quality by consistently acting in a particular way, which seems to me to make some level of sense. And that's why manners and treating each other correctly is going to be beneficial in the long run. And this gets into the conclusions here. This is the last little section of the book. Science and technology have produced a greater transformation of the physical conditions and apparatus of life in the past 100 years than had taken place in the previous 2,000 years. And that's probably even true right now. It's probably even more true. Yet when men turn these tremendous new powers to a war purpose, they employ them as recklessly as their ancestors employed the primitive means of the past. They pursue the same traditional ends without regards to the difference of their effect. Meaning, I used to throw a rock at you, and then I throw a grenade at you, and right now we can throw nuclear missiles at each other, and everyone dies. Sure. Truth is a spiral staircase. What looks true on one level may not be true on the next higher level. A complete vision must extend vertically as well as horizontally, but not only seeing the parts in relation to one another, but embracing the different planes. And this is where we kind of get to the final conclusion and the crux. And this is has a little bit to do with why don't we learn from history, but it has a lot to do with just life. He says, what can the individual learn from history as a guide to living? Not what to do, but what to strive for and what to avoid in striving. The importance and intrinsic value of behaving decently. The importance of seeing clearly, not least of seeing himself clearly. To face life with clear eyes, desirous to see the truth, and to come through it with clean hands, behaving with consideration for others while achieving such conditions as enable a man to get the best out of life, is enough for ambition, and a high ambition. So think about that statement. You want to go through life with clear eyes. You want to look for the truth. You want to come through it with clean hands. You want to behave with consideration for others, but at the same time, you want to achieve conditions that enable a man to get the best out of life. So you want to get good things in life, but you want to do it while you're considering with consideration for others. Only as a man progresses toward it does he realize what effort it entails and how large is the distance to go. So what he's talking about is not easy. To go through life and get the best out of life that you're able to achieve. And do that while you're still taking care of other people and considering other people. Back to the book. It is strange how people assume that no training is needed in the pursuit of truth. It is stranger still that this assumption is often manifest in the very man who talks of the difficulty of determining what is true. We should recognize that for this pursuit, anyone requires at least as much care and training as a boxer for a fight or a runner for a marathon. He has to learn how to detach his thinking from every desire and interest, from every sympathy and antipathy, like ridding oneself of superfluous tissue, the tissue of untruth which all human beings tend to accumulate for their own comfort and protection. This is what the ego builds up. I want to take care of that. And he must keep fit to become fitter. In other words, he must be true to the light he has seen. So you got to be able to detach. It's surprising to me that he doesn't use the word ego in here, right? Because desire and interest, that's ego-driven. Every sympathy and antipathy, that's ego-driven. Ridding oneself of the superfluous tissue, the lies that you tell yourself, that's your ego telling you lies. Your ego's lying to you a lot. In other words, he must be true to the light he has seen. He may realize that the world is a jungle. But if he has seen that it could be better for anyone if the simple principles of decency and kindliness were generally applied, then he must in honesty try to practice these consistently and live personally as if they were general. In other words, he must follow the light he has seen. Since he will be following it through a jungle, however, he should bear in mind the supremely practical guidance provided nearly 2,000 years ago. Behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves. So, there you go. That's a wrap on the book. A lot of good advice in the book. And like I said, it's only so much of it is about why we don't learn from history. It just goes off in all kinds of tangents. But such good advice. And obviously not just for combat, but to go through life with clear eyes, seeking the truth, to be considerate of others. Boy, is it weird that I have to review this on a podcast and we have to sit here and talk about being considerate of others while working to achieve the best that you can out of life. This is great. This is incredible. This is incredible advice. It's going to make your life so much better if you do those things. Achieve what you can. Be considerate of each other, of others. Seek the truth. That's what we're doing. These are good things for all of us to keep in front of our minds, and things that can help us all be better human beings and not start wars and not kill each other or attack each other.
Sure.
Or be filled with hatred for other people.
Yep.
By the way, people you've never even met before.
Never met. Yep.
It's getting wild out there. All right, so we're trying to be a little better. Echo Charles, speaking of becoming better.
Yes.
You mentioned one thing early on in this whole jam, that there's one thing that we can do as human beings that's going to help us in all aspect of our lives.
Yes, sir.
Everything that we do.
Yep.
What can we do to help it out? What is that thing? What is that one thing?
Exercise.
There you go.
It's true. It's absolutely true. It's funny. I was talking about this idea with Thomas DeLauer about food, right? Where it's like you have natural food, which, you know, in a nutshell is like the best, right? Natural food. And on this side of the spectrum is highly processed food for taste. So basically how that became a thing is people are like, okay, you know, I take this apple, whatever. How can I sell more apples? Make it taste a little bit better, right? So let's make I don't know. This is just hypothetically. Let's make a candy apple. Like, oh, wow, yeah, that's cool. People love the candy apple.
So now, like the one with the caramel on it?
Yeah, the caramel or the candy, red candy thing on the outside, right?
Hey, let's face it, those things are good.
Hey, now it tastes better than a normal apple, right? So it's like, cool, now that becomes the thing. Then some other person was like, I see what they did there. Let me make something that tastes even better than a candy apple. So they make, I don't know, a freaking piece of candy that's apple flavored, we'll say, right? But by that time, it's like, bro, well, the whole reason you ate the apple, all the health part of it is gone. So they're like, all right, but that's a problem. So now let's inject some fiber into this piece of candy now. Now it's healthy candy. See what I'm saying? Still got the candy. Now you got the fiber in there. Let's inject some vitamins in there.
So heading back towards an apple.
Exactly right. It's like, bro, why don't you just eat the apple? You know, at the end of the day. So it basically goes through this weird spectrum where it's like we take out all the natural parts and then because we want to feed like this specific purpose, but then it's like, dang, you know, you lose a bunch of it. So let's re-inject this other stuff to make it back serving the benefit of the original thing, you know? But it's now this weird Frankenstein thing. You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
So I was thinking while I was working out, by the way, I was like, bro, that's kind of what we do with workouts.
Yeah, because we used to like tilt, till the field.
Work all day, hunt for food, the whole deal. But now it's like...
You just realized that?
No, that part I didn't just realize. I realized that part, and then now we're, instead of... basically it's like, hey, we got what we need from exercise just by living, doing our normal living stuff. Now we don't.
Now we drive to the gym to get on the treadmill.
Exactly right. Yeah. It's like, exactly right. You get on a treadmill that doesn't go anywhere, by the way. Before it was like, shit, I'm trying to get to the next village or whatever the
Outrun
deal
the
is.
saber-toothed tiger.
Yeah, the whole deal, or play or do whatever, right? Now we're like, bro, I'm going to jump on a treadmill just to get those, it's like this art of, it's weird, bro. And even with like strength, right? Before we're working, lifting up heavy stuff, freaking carrying stuff across the field, like heavy stuff, bags of this or whatever, right? Now it's like, bro, we don't do that. We got equipment doing all that stuff, but I still got to be strong. So now I'm going to go like formulated, fabricated, heavy things called weights, by the way. It's not that it's this functional thing with weight. No, they're called weights for the sake of weights. And I'm going to lift them up again and again and again and then just to get my strength back. It's a weird kind of process.
You know how you can get solar power for your house?
Yes.
And they come with a big battery for your house?
Sure.
Wouldn't it be cool if you could recharge your battery by lifting, like pulling things and lifting things and biking and stuff like that? The only thing is, I kind of looked into this a little bit at some point, and you don't generate very much power on like a bike.
Yeah.
You could light a light for a little while, but then again, if you had your whole family, I remember we had in the SEAL teams for a while, we had these battery rechargers. So you could be in the field and for your radio, and we had these battery chargers that you could like crank this thing. And the amount of freaking cranking that you had to do to recharge one of these batteries. Like a little crank. You could turn this thing and it would generate power. The amount of power that it took to like recharge one of these batteries was impractical.
It's not realistic.
We didn't do it. We didn't do it. I don't think I ever actually recharged a battery one time ever in the field because when I tried it, it was like, 4 hours of cranking this thing. I think they were more aimed at special forces like Green Berets, because Green Berets, they're going to be, generally speaking, they might go on a mission where they're going out into the jungle with some host nation for months.
Oh, right.
And so then it makes sense. Like, hey, we're not going to get a resupply of batteries. We're going to crank this thing and it's going to recharge. But the amount of work you have to do to generate power that we take for granted, we flip on the light. Like if you had to go and freaking pedal a bike, so you would be so much more restrictive about how much energy you used. But wouldn't it be kind of nice if we did that? Because you think about what are we doing? We're eating food to give us the energy to lift the weights and ride the bike and pull the rower, and all that is just energy that goes into nowhere.
I know.
Whereas if we could set up some kind of a system where we can at least put a little juice back into the battery, right?
Yeah. I actually heard of a gym. I don't know if it was a fantasy thing or what, or video, whatever, but it was a gym. It was a commercial gym that the treadmills were hooked up to, some system where like it would add or subtract whatever from the electricity bill of the gym, and it would affect their membership price. I don't know. It like had something like that. But it's minimal.
It's minimal.
But Brad, so I found this out early on where on average to run 1 mile is 100 calories.
Okay.
I thought it was going to be way more. You ever ran a mile? Like your body running a mile, it's like, bro, that's freaking, I don't know, 1,000 calories is what it feels like, It's like, bro, 100 calories. You know how easy it is to eat or drink 100 calories?
Oh, it's a joke.
Easy money. So
there's, I was going to say there's some foods I bet you can get 100 calories in a bite.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
Yes.
Because
it's,
what is there, 9 grams of fat, 9 calories in a gram of fat, right?
Yep.
So that means if you put 10 grams, that's not hard to put 10 grams, or 11 grams, you get 99 calories in a bite.
Easy.
That's some crazy activity right there, boy.
Put it into perspective. Okay, there's these muffins. Gluten-free, all the stuff they get from Trader Joe's or wherever they're from, right? These chocolate muffins, 480 calories in one muffin. And it's not like it's this crazy big deluxe. Bro, it's easy to eat.
Let me ask you
the
this.
Whole thing.
If I put just unlimited supply of these Trader Joe, what kind of muffin is it? Trader Joe? What?
I don't even know if it's gluten-free for sure. I don't know if they're Trader Joe.
Let's say that you were going to watch a movie and I was going to give you a free pass on caloric intake. Your health is a waiver. Like this doesn't get a free. How many of those could you eat?
each little container has 4 of them in there. So I could probably comfortably and just be like, and not be uncomfortable. Probably 2 containers, maybe 8 of them, maybe. You 6, 8.
That's crazy.
Oh, yeah.
That's 2,000 calories per box. So you just had 4,000 calories, which is like the caloric intake for you probably per day. What you need?
That's more than I would burn per day, even with a normal exercise routine, for sure. Yeah, it is. To your point, right? You don't burn as many calories as you think you do. You're not producing.
It is weird though how many calories you burn just by your normal metabolism.
Yeah,
like because you think this is what doesn't make sense. You know, when you think about it, is it's 100 calories to run a mile, but then just in the day, every day, without doing anything, I burn 2,500 calories.
Yeah.
You know, just by walking around and just being a human.
Yeah, and sleeping too, by the way.
And sleeping, you're burning calories.
Yeah, exactly right. So when you do the math, it does make sense because you have your what's called basal metabolic rate. It's just how much you're burning, not really freaking doing anything. And if you want to put it into simpler terms, let's just say you're resting, like how much you burn. Just at rest or whatever. Sleeping, sitting there, whatever. You do that for so long in a 24-hour period.
You do it for 24 hours.
Compared to every other activity when you think about it. So it's like, it's just in background running.
But let's face it, when you run that mental game of like you just trained jiu-jitsu for an hour.
Yeah.
What does that feel like?
So
I mean hard rounds.
Oh yeah, hour. That's a lot. And that to me, and that's why I always say, I was just talking to JP yesterday, and jiu-jitsu as far as losing weight is the cheat code for that.
Because it's fun.
Because, so the 3 zones, right, is like what you do just at rest, right? That's however many calories that is. That's most, not because it's the hardest or most exertion. It's because it's the longest thing you do
lasts
during the day.
about 24 hours a day.
Yes, exactly right, which is the most. That's why you burn the most. Yeah. Then you have what's called, I think it's something along the lines of non-exercise activity, right? Well, that's walking, like walking here, walking there, depends on your job, like that kind of stuff, right? If you're, and then there's your exercise. And so the thing you do the least as far as time goes is exercise. Like no one's rolling for an hour is very like taxing. You just don't know it as much compared to like running on the track because it's so fun. Exactly right. You're with your friends and all this stuff. But or like running on a treadmill or running outside or whatever. That's like mundane. Like to have that much exertion compared, if you're running is like a lot. It's not comfortable and it's very unrealistic. That's why most people don't do it. So what they say is the savvy person. So the amount of calories you burn just at rest is going to depend on your body composition. So the more muscle you have, that's the big burner of the body, right? Your muscles. So a savvy person, right, wants to get in the shape that they want to get in, whatever that is, they're going to build some muscle. So now even when they're cruising, which let's face it, that's what we're doing factually, no matter how lazy or not lazy you are, that's what you're doing most of the time, cruising. While you're cruising, you're burning way more calories because you got all that muscle. See what I'm saying? And then when you exercise, you don't run and do some calorie burning exercise because that's minimal. You do some muscle building exercise. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So now it's like an investment. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. And then that's not to mention the non-exercise activity. You're still burning way more. See what I'm saying?
Check.
There you go.
That's what we're doing. We're exercising.
We're exercising 100%.
When we exercise, guess what we're going to need?
Fuel.
What kind of fuel do you recommend?
Jocko fuel. All day. The cleanest, most effective, every single way. Yeah, the good news too, in which, I commend you. I've known you for a long time. It's one of the many things I'm going to commend you about is hitting all essential angles of the fuel.
We got it. We got the protein, which you're going to need milk protein. Yep. So good. So tasty. So good for you. So good. Replenishing. You're going to build those muscles. They're going to make you a better human being. Help you in all aspects of your life. We got the energy drink if you need it.
It's true.
And we got the hydration. Yeah. The hydration system.
2 options, by the way.
2 options. What do you mean 2 options?
You can mix the powder.
You can mix the powder, or you can get the ready to drink one.
Exactly.
Hey, what's your assessment on the ready to drink one?
Ready to drink one is surprisingly good. I know it's gonna be good because I know that's the jam. You went into it early on with the false dichotomy, but I still accept it. Where you're like, well, yeah, what am I gonna do? Make it taste like crap? No, bro. You can make it taste okay, but I know that you focus on making it taste good, which actually functionally is actually best.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the whole entertainment thing with education. Yeah. It's like, cool.
I said from the word go, if you make protein that tastes like crap, no one drinks the protein.
Exactly.
If you make a hydration that tastes like crap, no one's going to drink it. So the stuff has to taste good. And especially our energy drink, the first version of the energy drink did not taste good. That's all on me. I did a bad job.
Yeah, because you only drink water.
Yeah. And so as we tuned that up, man, all the energy drink tastes good, but now we got those dialed in. The protein's definitely dialed in.
Yes, sir.
We got the freaking, highest ranking for taste. So that's awesome. And the hydrate is awesome too. So we got a lot of options for you. We got you covered.
Yes.
As Echo. Plus we got Joint Warfare, Super Krill. People were asking about, so we came out with some fish oil, and some people were, hey, should I take krill oil or fish oil? Look, krill oil is a superior product. Fish oil, some people want to take, it's almost like a personal preference that they like fish oil, or they are allergic to crustaceans. I know that sounds weird, but some people are like specifically allergic to crustaceans. So if you're one of those people, or you prefer the fish oil as opposed to krill, that's why we made it. But we've got that, Cold War, Time War, freaking good to go. So if you want any of this stuff, go to jockofuel.com. Also, we have the Milk Protein ready-to-drink shakes at Wawa. We got everything at Vitamin Shop. We got GNC, military commissaries, AFES, Hanford, Dash stores in Maryland, Wakefern, ShopRite, HEB, Meijer, Wegmans, Harris Teeter, Lifetime Fitness, Shields. Just everywhere you go, we got you covered. And if you got a small gym, or you go to a small gym, or a big gym. Look, have you been to Lifetime Fitness before?
Yeah.
That's a big gym.
Yes, sir.
If you go to a gym, but even if it's a small gym and you want them to have Jocko Fuel there, tell the gym owner to email jfsales@jockofuel.com. That's what we're doing. Jocko Fuel. You need fuel to be stronger, better, faster, smarter. We got you covered. Also, if you need American-made clothing, which you do, because otherwise you're supporting a communist government, a sweatshop, an ecological terror group. Did I just say ecological terror group? What do I mean by that? I mean an entire nation that doesn't care what it does to our environment. We care about that in America. That's why we have the EPA. That's why we have rules. That's why we have regulations. That's why we can't put our waste, our chemical waste, into the river, into the ocean. We can't let our fuel leak into the air. We take care of the environment in America. We also take care of our workers in America. So if you want to support that stuff, go to originusa.com and get the goods. Jiu-Jitsu gis, Jiu-Jitsu rash guards. Some sick rash guards, by the way.
Yes, sir.
I just ordered and just received the Blackout Raptor camo.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
You haven't seen that one yet, have you?
No, I have not.
So there's that one. We got everything that you need. Joggers, Jiu-Jitsu gis, jeans.
Good jeans.
The best jeans. Isn't it weird that you could be like, yo, I'm American. I'm wearing this such and such American iconic brand of jeans. Yeah. And your iconic brand of jeans are made in China by a totalitarian government that has slave labor making your pants that you're putting on, that you're proudly wearing. Unfortunately, you don't know that those things are made anti-freedom. They're the antithesis of freedom. They're about slavery. So don't support that. Support America. OriginUSA.com. That's what we're doing. Hey, also we have a law enforcement training session. So we do a jiu-jitsu event up in Maine. It's awesome. Bunch of jiu-jitsu black belts going to be there. And I'm talking world champions, former world champions, like the best guys. A lot of awesome jiu-jitsu instructors. And we've been doing a week, 6 days or something for civilians. Mm-hmm. But this year we're actually doing a law enforcement. So if you're in law enforcement and you want to train that jiu-jitsu, August 27th through the 31st in Maine, we'll be up there where you got a bunch of law enforcement black belts, highly skilled, that are going to help introduce or train jiu-jitsu with you from law enforcement, first responders, military. So check it out, 27th through the 31st in Maine. That's what we're doing. OriginUSA.com to find that event as well.
Sick. Yeah, I think, is the camp sold out right now?
The first camp is sold out. The LEO, the law enforcement, military, first responder, is not sold out yet.
Okay.
But it will.
Legit. Also, Jocko has a store. Call Jocko Store. This is where you can get your shirts mainly. We do a lot of shirts, a lot of cool shirts. But we've got hats and hoodies on there as well. If you want to represent discipline equals freedom, That's the deal. I'm telling you, that's where you get it. It's cool. Some good stuff on there. We just came out with a new Discipline Equals Freedom.
Yeah. What is it? Mod
version
4?
for
Is
mod,
this
4. Yes, that was the word I was looking for.
Can we still get Mod 1?
Mod 1, yes. And
Mod
Mod 2, 100%.
Mod 3?
And
Which one is Mod 3?
Mod 3 is called Standard Issue.
Oh, okay.
You did the Mod 2.
You're wearing Mod 2.
This is Mod 2, yes.
Yep.
On the hoodie or whatever. With the Standard Issue underneath, by the way.
Yeah, you just got all kinds of discipline today.
Representing hardcore. Anyway, yes, there's a new version. Version 4 is up, running. People are already representing. So that's you can get that there. Also, Shirt Locker. It's a subscription scenario. You get a new shirt every month, different design, a little bit more creative, if you will. People seem to like it. Same thing though. Go to jockostore.com. You click on the little thing that says Shirt Locker. You can check it out. See some designs on there. See if you like the vibe. But yeah, that's where you get it. jockostore.com.
Check it out. Also, you're gonna need steak in your life. Check out primalbeef.com and coloradocraftbeef.com. 2 outstanding American companies. Go get some steak. It's the best. Tastes so good. I must say, it's so good. Yes. So that's what we're doing. coloradocraftbeef.com. Check it out. primalbeef.com. Obviously, Colorado Craft Beef is from Colorado, and the Primal Beef is from the Shenandoah Valley. Just delicious steak, all from the same source. This one source in Colorado, one source in Virginia. Check it out if you want to get good steak, which you do. Get some there. primalbeef.com, coloradocraftbeef.com. We got you. Also subscribe to the podcast. Also subscribe to jockounderground.com. We just recorded a couple of those. They'll be out. Also, we have a YouTube channel. Also, we have Psychological Warfare. Also, Flipside Canvas, Dakota Meyer, making cool stuff to hang on your wall. I've written a bunch of books about leadership, strategy and tactics, extreme ownership, dichotomy of leadership. Written a bunch of those books. I've also written a bunch of warrior kid books. I think I've written 5, maybe 6 of those, plus Mikey and the Dragons. I've written a bunch of kids' books. Check those out. Get your kids on the warrior path. Let me tell you, it's going to be beneficial for them. I wish I would have had these books when I was a child. Check them out. Also, we have a leadership consultancy. We solve problems through leadership. Go to echelonfront.com for details. We have the muster in Dallas, 16 through 18 October. We have the council, which there might be a couple seats left when this comes out. If you want to come to that, it's up in the remote mountains of Washington State, a very small group. We sold out one of them. I think there's a couple seats left. The seats that are left are June 26th through the 29th. If you want to come, go register. The Women's Assembly coming up is September 11th through the 13th in San Antonio, Texas. We also have online leadership training. I was just on there on Monday, answering questions, getting after it. ExtremeOwnership.com if you want to learn how to lead. We can run you through those courses. It's going to make everything in your life better. It's going to give you a better understanding of every interaction that you have with other human beings. It is going to help you. We've had just success story after success story after success story through extremeownership.com. Check that out if you want to get on board. If you want to help service members, active and retired, you want to help their families, Gold Star families, check out Mark Lee's mom, Mama Lee. You heard General McFarland talking about this organization, americasmightywarriors.org. It is a great organization to help out veterans, their families, Gold Star families. Check it out. Also, heroesandhorses.org. Micah Fink up there in the mountains of Montana helping our veterans find themselves and find their way again. Jimmy May has also got his organization behind beyondthebrotherhood.org. Check that one out. If you want to connect with us, we're there. We're on the interwebs. Jocko.com. Also on social at Jocko Willink. Also Echoes at Echo Charles. Just be careful, because you might run into some people in there that are not acting like decent human beings. So just watch out. And then there'll be an algorithm that's going to try and drag you into go and act like not a normal human being, not a decent human being. So be careful of that. Thanks to all our men and women in the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines for all that you do every day to protect freedom and liberty around the world. We will honor your sacrifice. Same goes for our police, law enforcement, firefighters, paramedics, EMTs, dispatchers, correctional officers, Border Patrol, Secret Service, as well as all other first responders. Thank you for protecting us on the home front. And to everyone else out there, listen to that incredible life advice from B.H. Liddell Hart. Face life with clear eyes. And with those clear eyes, seek the truth. And in order to do that, you have to detach. Detach from your own desires and interests. Detach from your sympathies and your hostilities. Don't lie to yourself. Don't let your ego be the source of your compulsions. Don't let your ego drive what you're doing. Learn from history and move forward out of the jungle of darkness and toward the light of the truth. And that's all we've got for tonight. And until next time, this is Echo and Jocko.